Chapter 1297. To be on the safe side, Lu Yi wandered in the nearby space for a few more days. He didn't find any more traces of those star beasts. Even the meteorite belt they were hiding in had drifted far away and disappeared without a trace. Only then did he relax. This was his first battle after ascending to the constellation level. In terms of results, it wasn't bad. However, during the battle, Lu Yi also noticed some of his shortcomings. Because he had just ascended to the constellation level not long ago, his control over his own strength wasn't perfect. Of course, this wasn't a big deal. It wouldn't even affect his combat strength too much. Moreover, as time passed, this problem would slowly improve. In addition, Lu Yi also discovered something. It was indeed difficult to kill a constellation realm cultivator. He didn't know the situation of cultivators from other races. After all, he hadn't fought them head-on. For example, those star beasts all had unparalleled recovery abilities. The hideous wounds left on their bodies by the mountain pansaber would often heal in a few breaths of time. This was something that couldn't happen below the constellation level. This was undoubtedly the benefit of the essence of flesh and blood that had reached a certain level. It was also thanks to the mountain pansaber that had been enhanced with the divine edge spirit mark that it was sharp enough. Otherwise, Lu Yi probably wouldn't have been able to kill many star beasts in this battle. This encounter gave Lu Yi a reminder. In the seemingly quiet and lonely starry skies, there was often no telling when danger would descend. Wandering the starry skies, one not only had to be vigilant of the cultivators of the various races, but also of the strange star beasts. After a hard battle, there were still some gains. The demonic beasts in the domain had monster cores, and so did the star beasts. While Lu Yi was killing the star beasts, he was also collecting their monster cores. Although the environment wasn't right and time was short, so he wasn't able to collect all of them, he still managed to collect about half. This thing should also be able to cultivate. Thinking of this, he took out a constellation realm Yao core and held it in his hand. He activated the talent tree's power to test it out. After a series of experiments, he found that it was as he thought. The Yao cores of star beasts could be used for cultivation. Moreover, the energy contained in them was much greater than that of spiritual jades. This was normal. Take the demon beasts in the domain for example. The energy contained in the Yao core of a divine sea realm demon beast was definitely not comparable to that of spiritual jades. After all, it was the crystallization of the demon beast strength. By the same logic, a star beast's Yao core was naturally incomparable to a spirit jade. However, this cultivation method was destined to be only suitable for oneself. Other cultivators could not imitate it. Without the roots of the innate skill tree, cultivators would not be able to refine the monster core with their own abilities. Directly swallowing it was even more impossible. Therefore, in the starry skies, the monster cores of star beasts would generally be used for alchemy or other purposes. There would always be a use for them. He continued to fly forward, searching and recording along the way. Occasionally, he would send his own records back to the 9 states so that Jianghu could complete the star map of the Guardian Hall. As he continued to travel further and further, even with the help of the Tianji pillar that he carried with him, his connection with the 9 regions grew weaker and weaker. The most important manifestation of this was that there was a certain degree of delay in the transmission of information. The transmission of news among the cultivators of the 9 regions was very convenient. There was no delay at all. But now there was a delay. Obviously, it was because the distance was too far. This was exactly what Little 9 had said before. The further away one was from the 9 regions, the weaker the connection. Until this day, when he tried to send a message to Jianghu, he found that he could not even send a message out. Lu Yi knew that he had exceeded the limit of the 9 regions. This limit could be considered the airspace of the 9 regions for the time being. If he went any further, he would exceed the airspace of the 9 regions. Calculating the time, it had taken him about half a year to leave the 9 regions. This was consistent with the information he had received from Jianghu. Half a year's journey was also his own plan. After all, this was his first time exploring the starry skies. It was not good to go too far. It would not be too late to explore further in the future when he had more experience. Lu Yi felt that he was the type of person who did things in a relatively safe manner. Since encountering that wave of star beasts 3 months ago, Lu Yi had not encountered any living creatures. He had been exploring alone. Fortunately, his cultivation had not been interrupted. Although it was not as efficient as normal cultivation, overall, he had reached about 70%. What made Lu Yi feel a little helpless was that even so, his cultivation did not seem to have improved at all. However, his flesh and blood had indeed become more vigorous than before. When he looked inside himself, the specks of starlight hidden in his flesh and blood had become denser. This could be considered a kind of improvement. However, he did not know how long it would take for him to reach the middle stage of the constellation realm and reach the level of the essence of his organs. This confirmed his previous guess. The advancement of the constellation realm was many times more difficult than the advancement of the constellation realm. It would definitely take a long time to accumulate. If this was the case for the constellation realm, there was no need to mention Yu Yao and Ri Zhao. The higher the cultivation realm, the harder it would be to advance. It was no wonder that there were very few Sunshine Realm experts around the reincarnation tree. Unless they were from a top-tier realm and did not have to worry about resources, it was extremely difficult for a Sunshine Realm expert to appear even in those older and larger realms. Looking at it this way, the constellation realm was the main body in the starry skies. The chances of encountering Yu Yao were not high, and the chances of encountering Ri Zhao were even lower. It was unknown whether Yu Xian had been lucky or unlucky to have discovered the 9 regions, which had just connected to the starry skies. Now that he had reached his target, Lu Yi did not intend to go any deeper. He planned to return according to his original plan. Of course, he was not really going back the same way he had come. The area he wanted to explore this time was a 3-dimensional fan-shaped area. Thus, he only needed to change his direction slightly to return to the 9 regions and expand the area he could explore. Just as he was about to do so, he suddenly saw a ray of light from the corner of his eye. It was rapidly approaching from the side. The speed of the ray of light was extremely fast. It was several times faster than the fastest speed he had ever tried. He did not know what it was. Before Lu Yi could take a closer look, a powerful divine sense swept out from that direction. Lu Ye's expression changed. He immediately turned around, released his spiritual power, and hurriedly fled. Since it had a divine sense, it was a living being. Furthermore, with such a powerful divine sense, Lu Yi reckoned that it was most likely a Sunshine Realm expert. Lu Yi naturally did not dare to recklessly come into contact with a Sunshine Realm expert in the starry skies. Who knew if the other party was good or bad? He was incomparably depressed. Previously, he had thought that the main body of activity in the starry skies was the constellation realm. Even Yu Yao rarely encountered them, let alone Ri Zhao. Who would have thought that he would encounter one in the blink of an eye? However, since he had been discovered, it was not that easy to escape. Lu Yi could clearly feel the powerful divine sense sticking to his body like maggots. No matter how hard he tried to escape, he could not shake it off. After a few breaths, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. At the same time, a somewhat old voice sounded in his ears. "Kid, why are you running?" Lu Yi turned his head stiffly. Only then did he see the owner of the divine sense clearly. It was a human, and his appearance was somewhat sloppy. His tattered clothes looked as if they had not been washed in a long time. His chin had a messy white beard, and he wore something that looked like a copper band on his forehead. He was not tall. In fact, he was half a head shorter than Lu Yi. If such a person appeared in the secular world, everyone would think that he was a beggar. However, Li did not dare to underestimate him. This was because he felt that the other party was slightly stronger than Yu Xian. There was no doubt that he was in the Sunshine Realm. Lu Yi placed his right hand on the Panshan saber. With a stiff expression, he replied, "Senior, is something the matter?" Although they were both humans, Lu Yi did not let his guard down. In such an environment, with such an expert, and with such an encounter, his life was already in the other party's hands. However, Lu Yi was not prepared to compromise. Even if he knew that he was no match for the other party, he would still fight back if the other party really attacked. He could not understand why he would meet a Ri Zhao cultivator so coincidentally. The old man clearly sensed Lu Ye's small movements, but he did not care. The difference in strength was obvious. If he really wanted to kill Lu Yi would not be able to resist. It's nothing. It's rare to meet a living person, so I came over to chat. Life is too boring. As he said that, he activated his spiritual power and wrapped it around Lu Yi. In the next moment, Lu Yi experienced the terrifying speed of a Rizhao cultivator. Not only that, but he also felt a prickling sensation on his back. It was as if a great danger was coming from behind him. That intense sense of danger was something that he could not resist with his current cultivation. He hurriedly turned his head and saw a ray of light chasing after him. It was the ray of light that he had seen before. From the ray of light, there was an extremely sharp killing intent. As for what the ray of light was, Lu Yi was not sharp enough to see it. "Senior, what are you doing?" Lu Yi asked. He did not feel any malice from the old man, but he could not leave his life in the hands of others. Lu Yi did not know why the other party was holding him hostage. "This old man said that I came over to talk to you. Are you stupid?" Lu Yi was helpless. It was just a simple conversation. Why did the old man hold him hostage? They could have communicated through spiritual will. Also, what's that behind me? The old man pursed his lips. "Well, you can think of it as a flying sword." "Flying sword?" Lu Yi was shocked. "Then why is it chasing after you?" The old man laughed dryly. "This flying sword has a spirit. This old man touched it in an ancient secret realm, and it has been chasing after me ever since." Lu Yi was dumbfounded. How could there be such a bizarre thing in this world? The old man's cultivation should be at least in the Rizhao realm. Then what level is this flying sword? It chased after a Rizhao cultivator until he could only flee in panic. He did not even dare to turn around to fight back. As for what the old man said about accidentally touching the flying sword, Lu Yi was too lazy to believe it. However, he was too lazy to ask about the secret behind it. After all, this was the old man's private matter. The old man might not be willing to talk about it. Chapter 1298. Do you have anything to eat? Just as Lu Yi was pondering, the old man's voice rang in his ears. What? Lu Yi was taken aback. He thought he had misheard. There was no reason for a sunshine cultivator to ask him for food. The old man looked like a beggar, but he couldn't be a beggar. Do you have anything to eat? The old man repeated. Lu Yi heard him clearly this time. He was speechless. Although he didn't know what the old man meant, he still nodded. Yes. As he spoke, he took out a large piece of dried meat. His storage pouch contained quite a few of these things, mainly for Hu Po's needs in the past. He himself was also greedy for food, but ever since his cultivation had slowly increased, he rarely ate these things. The old man took it, put it in his mouth, chewed a few times and swallowed it whole. Still not satisfied, he said, "Again." Lu Yi took out another large piece, but the old man still asked for more. He didn't have the demeanor of a sunshine cultivator at all. As a result, Lu Yi continued to take out all kinds of edible things. At first, it was still dried meat that could be eaten directly, but later on, it was some uncooked beast meat that was dripping with blood. The old man didn't care whether it was raw or cooked. Anyway, he would eat as long as there was meat. He seemed to have a good appetite. Lu Yi was on tenterhooks. He was afraid that the old man would eat him too. That would be bad. But since he was under the eaves, he could only be so careful. Fortunately, Lu Yi didn't feel any malice from the old man. No more. After a while, Lu Yi spread out his hands. Although he had a lot of meat left, it wasn't much. With the old man eating like this, it was naturally used up. The old man smacked his lips and said generously, "Bring me wine." This time, Lu Yi had experience. He took out all the wine in his storage. There weren't many, only a few dozen jars. They were leftovers from the last time he drank with his third and fourth senior brothers. The old man laughed heartily. "You're not bad. This old man likes you." After saying that, he opened the seal of a jar of wine and sucked the wine into his stomach with his mouth closed. After drinking a dozen jars, the old man burped and patted his stomach. Comfortable. He solemnly put away the remaining jars. It seemed that he planned to enjoy them in the future. Glancing at Lu Yi, who looked calm but was actually vigilant, the old man chuckled. "Kid, don't worry. This old man doesn't kill for no reason. You'll know when you ask around." Lu Yi couldn't help but complain. He had just stepped into the galaxy and hadn't even explored the region. How could he ask around? But from the old man's words, this old man seemed to be famous in the galaxy. "I'm not worried." The old man smiled and asked, "Which realm are you from?" "The realm of 9 heavens." "Realm of 9 heavens." The old man pondered for a moment before shaking his head. "I've never heard of it. It must be some remote place." Even though he had wandered the starry skies and was very experienced, he did not dare say that he knew all the realms in the starry skies. However, since it was a realm that he had never heard of, it was definitely not a powerful realm. "You seem to have just entered the constellation not long ago. Do you have any difficulties in cultivation? If you do, feel free to ask. This old man can give you a few pointers." The old man asked again. Hearing this, Lu Yi didn't hold back and asked about the key points of cultivation after the constellation. Although he had some information from the jade slips given by Little Nine, the records were not comprehensive enough, so it was difficult to guarantee that his understanding was correct. Yang Qing left too quickly. When he was here, Lu Yi didn't think to ask about this, so now he couldn't find someone to ask for advice. The old man he met in the galaxy was a suitable person. The old man immediately told Lu Yi about the cultivation of the constellation. Lu Yi listened carefully and compared it with his previous understanding. Sure enough, he found many mistakes. These mistakes wouldn't cause any problems in his cultivation. As he cultivated, he would definitely notice it, but it would waste a lot of time. The old man seemed to have no one to talk to for a long time. Not only did he talk about the things to pay attention to in the constellation realm, but he also told Lu Yi a lot of random information. And these were exactly what Lu Yi, or 9 states, lacked. After talking for half a day, the old man took a sip of wine and chuckled. "Your 9 heavens realm has just been promoted to a large realm, right?" Senior's eyes are as sharp as torches. Lu Yi nodded. The old man said, "It's not that my eyes are sharp, but this is all common knowledge. Any realm with a Yuyao realm overseeing it would know, but you don't know. It's obvious that the realm doesn't have a Yuyao realm. Since that's the case, it must have been promoted to a large realm not long ago." Lu Yi blushed with shame. Just as he was about to ask for more advice, the old man suddenly said, "It's about time." Lu Yi looked at him in confusion. The old man smiled. "If you stay here any longer, I'm afraid you'll die without a doubt." Lu Yi had no idea what he was talking about. He only felt that this old man seemed a little strange. The old man scratched his head. "I ate your meat and drank your wine. I should at least give you some benefits." Lu Yi immediately said, "What Senior said just now is already a great benefit to this junior. I dare not ask for more." The old man said, "That won't do. I, Feng Rumo, have always been clear about gratitude and grudges. What I told you is just common knowledge. It's not worth anything. You accompanied me to relieve my boredom, and I ate and drank. How can I just let it go like this?" Lu Yi really didn't want to take any benefits from others. Encountering such a person for no reason, even if he didn't feel any malice from the other party, it was still fine to exchange a few words. But if he really took something from the other party, then there would be more implications. It was hard to know what a person's heart was thinking. Moreover, this old man looked exactly like a beggar. He even had to beg for food and drink. He probably didn't have anything good. Even if he did have something good, it wasn't something a constellation realm cultivator like him could handle. Feng Rumo frowned and fell into deep thought. He muttered to himself, "What should I give you?" After a while, his eyes suddenly lit up. "I've got it." As he said this, he reached out and grabbed. When Lu Yi reacted, he suddenly realized that the Panshan saber at his waist was already in the old man's hand. Lu Ye's expression instantly turned cold, and his eyelids drooped slightly. A weapon cultivator's weapon was an extension of his life. He definitely wouldn't let others take it easily. The old man took away the Panshan saber without asking. He had undoubtedly violated a taboo. However, the difference in strength between them was obvious. Even if Lu Yi was angry, it was of no use. Feng Rumo raised his hand and wiped the Panshan saber. It was unknown what he did, but he casually threw it back to Lu Yi. I sealed a secret technique in the saber. When you meet someone you can't beat later, use that secret technique to deal with him. However, you only have one chance. You have to grasp it well. He looked as if Lu Yi would definitely meet an enemy he couldn't beat. As he spoke, he pointed in another direction. Fly in that direction. There's an opportunity there, but there's also danger. Consider it carefully before deciding whether to go or not. Lu Yi suddenly realized that this was the benefit that Feng Rumo gave him. The secret technique sealed in the saber should be to deal with this opportunity. Of course, he could choose not to go in that direction. If so, the benefit that Feng Rumo gave him was that he could use the secret technique sealed in the saber to fight enemies in the future. Anyway, no matter what, Lu Yi wouldn't lose out. He only gave Feng Rumo some wine and meat, and he received such a benefit. He didn't even take into account the various information that he had told Lu Yi before. For a moment, Lu Yi only felt that he was measuring the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. Speaking of which, the difference in strength between them was so great. If Feng Rumo really wanted to harm him, it would be a matter of moving his fingers. Of course, the premise is that you can survive. However, I have to say something first. When you encounter danger soon, you can't use the secret technique in the saber. Otherwise, you'll be in big trouble. Soon, before Lu Yi finished speaking, he heard Feng Rumo shout in a low voice, "Go!" Immediately after, a gentle force pushed out, and his figure involuntarily left his side. When Lu Yi stood still again, Feng Rumo had already run far away. The light of the flying sword was still chasing him, as if it would chase him until the end of time. Lu Yi immediately understood the meaning of Feng Rumo's last sentence. That was because a ray of light suddenly separated from the bright sword light and rushed towards him. From afar, Feng Rumo's voice came into his ears. Any living thing that comes into contact with this old man will be locked onto by this sword light. Boy, try your best to survive. We'll meet again. The little good impression that Lu Yi had of this old man disappeared in an instant. Sure enough, no stranger walking in the starry sky was purely good. The old man's temperament was not bad. Other than detaining Lu Yi, making him accompany him for half a day, and asking for some wine and meat, he didn't do anything excessive. He didn't even rob Lu Yi of his spirit jade. In the end, he sealed a secret technique in his mountain saber and pointed out the location of an opportunity. However, he still kept Lu Yi by his side knowing what would happen to him. This was obviously not what a good person should do. Lu Yi also suddenly understood what Feng Rumo meant when he said it was almost time. From the current situation, any living thing that came into contact with Feng Rumo would be locked onto by the sword light. The longer the contact, the greater the power of the sword light. If not for this, Feng Rumo would not have let Lu Yi go so easily. He would have kept him by his side for a while and talked more. This weird old man was not a good person, but he was not a bad person in the true sense. Simply defining him as good or bad was obviously not comprehensive enough. Not only Feng Rumo, but in fact, most of the cultivators in the cultivation world were like this. Lu Yi could only sigh at his bad luck. In this vast starry sky, he encountered such a thing for the first time when he left the 9 regions. Without time to sigh, he raised his saber and stabbed out. His spiritual power surged wildly, and bits of starlight fell, attacking the oncoming sword light. Chapter 1299. Lu Yi had no idea what the quality of a flying sword that could make a Sunshine State cultivator not even dare to turn his head back was. Moreover, this flying sword had its own spirituality. Lu Yi knew that if this flying sword were to target him, there was only one thing he could do: wash his neck and wait for it to strike. But now, the flying sword that was targeting him was not the main body of the flying sword, but a split sword ray. Then he might be able to block it. At the same time, the weapon box at Lu Ye's waist vibrated, and an imperial weapon flew out. This was a layer of insurance. Before coming into contact with the sword ray, he was not sure if he could block it. Specks of starlight blossomed in the air, accurately piercing the incoming sword ray. Lu Ye's face turned serious. His long saber spun like a crescent moon, and in an instant, the saber ray was as white as snow. Numerous crescent-shaped saber rays flew out and met the incoming sword ray. However, regardless of whether it was the first form or the second form, they were unable to stop the sword ray's advance. The sword ray did not look impressive, but it was powerful and unstoppable. When Lu Ye's saber rays came into contact with it, they melted like snowflakes under the blazing sun. Is this something that a constellation cultivator can block? That Feng Rumo is simply harming people. After realizing that something was wrong, Lu Yi turned around and ran. He circulated his spiritual power to the maximum, and his speed quickly reached a limit. However, the piercing sensation behind him became clearer and clearer. The sword ray was getting closer and closer to him. The sharp aura made Lu Yi understand that if he was hit by this sword ray, he would not be able to block it no matter how strong his body was. After running for less than 5 breaths, Lu Yi had no choice but to activate his spatial spiritual runes and disappear. Almost at the same time, the sword ray pierced through his original position. Lu Yi reappeared 1,000 miles away. However, before he could catch his breath, the feeling of being locked on by spiritual power came again. He looked up and saw a speck of light flying toward him. Even though it was just a split sword light, it still had the effect of locking onto the enemy and chasing after them. Lu Ye's teleportation was unable to shake it off. Of course, the main reason was that time was short and the distance he had teleported wasn't far enough. The Imperial equipment that had just been retrieved shot out again, and this time, it wasn't just one Imperial equipment that was shot out, but 5 or 6. In the starry sky, the Imperial equipment quickly flew in all directions. Lu Yi held his saber and stood still. He looked at the sword aura that was rapidly approaching him, judging the distance between them. Only when Xiao Chen was 50 kilometers away did he draw his saber and send out strands of saber light. He was sure that even if he used the void spirit runes to shift, the sword light would still chase after him. If this continued, he would waste a lot of time. Therefore, there was only one way to get rid of this sword light: continuously consume its power. In the end, it was just a sword ray that had split off. It was a tree without roots, a water without a source. When its power was exhausted to a certain extent, it would naturally disappear. Lu Yi didn't dare to let it get close to him, so he could only use his saber light to deal with it. Although he didn't know how effective this was, it was safer. If it were any other constellation realm cultivator, they definitely wouldn't be able to imitate his method. In the face of such a sword light, they could only face it head-on. In the end, there was a high chance that they would die. The crescent-shaped saber light kept bombarding as Lu Yi waved his saber, accurately colliding with the sword light. When the distance between them was only about 5 kilometers, Lu Yi activated the void spirit runes and left the place. When he reappeared in another place, as expected, the sword light chased after him again, repeating the same pattern. At first, there were no results. The luster and power of the sword light showed no signs of weakening. However, as time passed and Lu Yi continued to use it, he could clearly feel that the sword light's power was weakening. After half a day, the luster of the sword light had dimmed to the point that it was almost undetectable. This time, Lu Yi didn't activate the void spirit runes. Instead, he held his saber and rushed toward the sword light. The moment they passed each other, he slashed out with his saber. The sword light shattered. The feeling of being locked on also disappeared at the same time. Lu Yi stood still and couldn't help but sigh. A mere sword beam had actually taken him half a day to resolve it. How terrifying was the flying sword's main body? And in the end, it wasn't something that a constellation realm cultivator could get rid of, nor could he resist it. Did Feng Rumo want to kill him? But if he really wanted to, why did he have to do it? Lu Yi had indeed thought wrongly. Since Feng Rumo had let Lu Yi go at that time, it was because he was certain that the split sword light would not take his life. Of course, it was inevitable that he would suffer a little and be injured. However, when one's cultivation reached the constellation realm, their recovery ability would become stronger. As long as they didn't die at that time, they would recover after a while. According to Feng Rumo's estimation, Lu Ye's injuries would take about 1 or 2 months to fully recover. At that time, he would be safe and sound. However, he underestimated Lu Ye's methods. It was mainly using the Void Spirit runes to teleport. Not to mention a Constellation Realm cultivator, even Rizhao couldn't do it unless he was prepared in advance. Lu Yi could be considered to have used a cheap trick to avoid suffering the consequences of his actions. After dealing with the sword light, Lu Yi found a desolate star nearby. In the starry sky, there were many desolate stars like this. There were also meteorites drifting everywhere. It could be said that they could be seen everywhere. Such desolate stars didn't have the slightest bit of vitality and wouldn't give birth to any living creatures. However, there was a high chance of finding spiritual jades. Lu Yi had previously gained from many desolate stars. This time, he didn't come to find spiritual jades. He just needed a place to recover and at the same time, to determine his current location. Being swept away by Feng Rumo for a while, he was already out of the range that Lu Yi had planned in advance. Fortunately, the distance wasn't too far, so it wasn't a big problem. The entanglement with the sword light had consumed a lot of his energy. He took out a spiritual jade and held it in his hand, urging the power of the talent tree to absorb it, controlling it to a reasonable efficiency of not wasting it. Only then did Lu Yi determine his current location through the position of the Sun Star and Venus Star. He had tried this method many times on his previous journey and had some experience. Therefore, after a while, he roughly knew his and Jiuzhou's location. He then checked his Pan Shan saber. Feng Rumo said that there was a secret technique sealed within the Pan Shan saber. However, he didn't say what kind of secret technique it was, so Lu Yi didn't know. After careful inspection, he found that there were indeed traces of a seal within the Pan Shan saber. However, the seal wasn't very strong. Therefore, as long as he poured in enough spiritual power, he could break it. At that time, the secret technique sealed within would be released. This should be the method to use the secret technique. Lu Yi didn't know how powerful the secret technique was. After all, it was a one-time use. It wouldn't be good to test it out. However, a Sunshine Realm cultivator should be extraordinary. After resting for half a day, he recovered to his original state. Only then did Lu Yi think about the opportunity that Feng Rumo had given him. There were two choices in front of him. One was to follow Feng Rumo's instructions and investigate. The secret technique sealed within the Pan Shan saber was prepared for this opportunity. Of course, Lu Yi didn't have to go. In any case, the seal within the Pan Shan saber was already a benefit. If he kept it, it might be a life-saving asset in the future. Also, Feng Rumo had said that it was indeed an opportunity, but it was also dangerous. But since it was an opportunity, how could there be no risk? Lu Yi had wandered the world for so long, so how could he not understand this principle? Lu Yi didn't want to miss out on the opportunity pointed out by a Sunshine Realm cultivator. He jumped up and flew in the direction that Feng Rumo had pointed out. He would go and take a look first. If it was really too dangerous, he would just give up. He couldn't just ignore it. Cultivators were never afraid of trouble, especially people like Lu Yi. If he didn't know, then so be it. Now that he knew, he had to investigate. From a certain point of view, curiosity wasn't a trait unique to the Fey race. Almost every race had it. Back then, Feng Rumo had only pointed casually, and Lu Yi had been constantly moving and changing his position while entangled with the sword light. Therefore, it was still somewhat difficult to determine the direction Feng Rumo had pointed at. Without a suitable reference point in space, there was no way to determine up, down, left, and right. Often, one wrong thought could lead to thousands of miles of error. Fortunately, Lu Ye's sense of direction was not bad, and his temperament was also quite open-minded. He had the mentality of looking if he could find it, but if he couldn't, then so be it. There was no pressure. As he flew, he didn't find anything. After flying for more than half a month, he didn't find anything except some spirit jades. Lu Yi wanted to go back home. He guessed that he had gone in the wrong direction. Otherwise, he would have found the opportunity that Feng Rumo had pointed out. He made up his mind to search for another half a month. If he still didn't find it, he would follow the original plan and head back to 9 regions. Thinking of this, his mood became more relaxed. In the end, it didn't even take half a month. Less than 10 days later, Lu Yi saw a tattered spirit boat in the distance. The spirit boat was very big with 3 floors. Its shape was similar to the spirit boats in 9 regions, but it was obviously of higher quality and was suitable for sailing in the starry sky. At first glance, this spirit boat was a very aggressive type. The shape of the whole spirit boat looked quite ferocious, like a dormant beast. However, no one knew what it had encountered, but the entire hull of the boat was in tatters, as if it had gone through an extremely difficult and desperate battle. The most obvious damage was the huge hole on the side of the boat, which went straight into the interior. In the starry sky, such a ferocious and broken spirit boat was slowly floating, giving off a strange and gloomy feeling. Was this the opportunity that Feng Rumo had mentioned? Lu Yi wasn't sure. But if the direction he was looking for was right, it should be this. What kind of opportunity was this broken spirit boat? Lu Yi didn't rush forward, but flew a few laps around the spirit boat. He carefully spread out his divine sense to investigate from a distance. Chapter 1300. As a result, Lu Yi did not detect any aura of living beings from this spirit boat. It made sense. The spirit boat had obviously experienced a cruel battle, and the spirit boat itself was damaged to this extent. How could there be any cultivators left? They must have either died or escaped. At this point, Lu Yi could not be sure whether the spirit boat in front of him was the opportunity that Feng Rumo had pointed out. This spirit boat floated from nowhere in the starry sky, and he did not know where it would float to. Before Lu Yi encountered it, it must have been wandering for a long time. In that case, there must have been other cultivators who had encountered this boat. If there was really something good on the boat, it would not have waited for him to search. Lu Yi was certain that this was most likely a worthless broken warship. For a moment, he was a little bored, but since he had encountered it, he should explore it. He flew a few more laps around the spirit boat, and his spiritual force crossed to explore. After finding nothing unusual, Lu Yi stopped and condensed his clone. Even if he could conclude that there was no danger on this spirit boat, he still had to be careful. If a cultivator was not careful enough in the starry sky, he would be unlucky sooner or later. Soon, the sword cultivator clone appeared beside Lu Yi and dressed the clone. This time, he did not equip the sword gourd. After all, he was only going to investigate and should not need the sword gourd. With a thought, the clone landed on the spirit boat. Stepping on the deck, he saw traces of the battle everywhere. There were also some mottled bloodstains and hundreds of holes of various sizes. After searching, he did not find anything valuable on this broken deck. It could even be said that the entire deck was empty. The clone then headed towards the interior of the ship. A moment later, the main body, who had been outside, also rushed onto the spirit boat and explored with the clone. Just as Lu Yi had thought before, there was no danger on this spirit boat. In this way, he could be sure of one thing. This was not the opportunity that Feng Rumo had pointed out before. It was just a coincidence that he had encountered this broken spirit boat. The clone began to search from the 3rd floor of the cabin, and the main body searched from the bottom of the cabin. This could also increase the efficiency. They searched the rooms one by one. After half a day, the clone and the main body gathered together, and Lu Yi casually put away the clone. What a waste of effort. It was just a broken boat. There was nothing valuable on it. Even the broken boat itself was worthless. Thinking about it, if it really had the slightest bit of value, it would have been taken away by the cultivator who discovered it. How could they let it drift freely in the starry sky? Lu Yi was about to leave, but just as he stood up, a sudden change occurred. Suddenly, a thick fog appeared out of thin air. Under the cover of this fog, one's eyes could not see, and their spiritual sense could not penetrate it. Lu Yi was shocked. He immediately pulled out the mountain pan saber and activated the divine edge spirit inscriptions. His spiritual energy surged and he was ready to attack. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't find anything out of the ordinary on the spirit boat when he was inspecting it, but something like this happened just as he was about to leave. This was obviously not normal. His figure quickly rushed up, but the strange thing was that the thick fog still lingered around him, and he couldn't get rid of it. Lu Yi used a wisp of his consciousness to check on his talent tree and found that there was nothing wrong with it. From this, he could confirm that the fog was not poisonous, but it was obviously not an ordinary fog. Otherwise, It wouldn't be impossible for a constellation realm spiritual sense to see through it. An illusion formation? Or a maze formation? Lu Yi could only conclude that he had fallen into some kind of brilliant formation. He activated the insight spirit inscriptions to enhance his eyes and looked around, but he didn't find anything special. It wasn't a formation. He had good attainments in the Tao of formations. If there were really any remnants of a formation on the spirit boat, he should have noticed it long ago. But in fact, his main body and clone didn't find anything when they searched. If it wasn't a formation, what could it be? Even if there was a sudden change, Lu Yi didn't panic at all. He only looked for a way to break out. But the strange thing was that no matter how hard he flew, he still couldn't fly out of the fog's range. He felt that he had already flown thousands of miles in a short time, but the fog was still thick around him. Just as Lu Yi was thinking, he suddenly heard a ghostly wail and howl. The sound came from all directions and went straight into his mind. In such a strange environment, a timid person would probably feel their hair stand on end. Lu Ye's expression was grave. He kept looking left and right, his spiritual sense moving back and forth, trying to find any traces of abnormalities. Suddenly, a loud shout came from the depths of the fog. "Let's set sail." The ghostly wail and howl became playful at this moment. Lu Yi suddenly turned his head to look in the direction of the sound. It was also at this moment that the thick fog suddenly dissipated, and Lu Ye's vision finally became clear again. A bearded face appeared in Lu Ye's field of vision. It was a burly man, who looked to be in his 30s. He wore a short-sleeved shirt, and his well-defined muscles were bulging. Lu Yi didn't even think and slashed at this guy. On the pitch-black mountain blade, the light of the divine edge spirit mark shone to the extreme in an instant. However, at the same time that Lu Yi slashed, a lot of information suddenly surged in his mind uncontrollably. This information came inexplicably, and he had never known it before. It was as if someone had forcibly stuffed this information into his mind. Qinzong, late-stage constellation. The first mate of the Long Dragon warship. Lu Yi instantly saw through the identity of this bearded man. This slash was Lu Ye's full strength, and it couldn't be said to be weak. However, this Qinzong's cultivation was 2 whole levels higher than Lu Ye's, and he was also an individual cultivator, so his reaction was extremely fast. He seemed to have expected this and had already activated his protective spiritual energy before Lu Yi slashed. This slash cut into the opponent's protective spiritual energy, but it didn't break through. Qinzong jumped back and looked at Lu Yi in astonishment. "Captain, what are you doing?" There were a few other figures beside him, and they all looked at Lu Yi, puzzled. Lu Yi held his blade and stood in place. His eyes were lowered, and he quickly checked the various information that had just surged into his mind. His gaze swept over the few figures, and he compared them with the strange information that had appeared. Xiao Jianming, late-stage constellation, second mate of the Long Dragon warship. Zhou Xing, mid-stage constellation, array master of the Long Dragon warship. Su Qingwei, mid-stage constellation, ship doctor. There were only these few people beside him, but there were clearly more than these few people. In Lu Ye's divine sense, there were more than a dozen auras around him, and all of them were in the constellation realm. And he was the captain of the Long Dragon warship. They were a group of galactic pirates active in the starry sky. They plundered everywhere, committed crimes, and committed many evil deeds. Lu Ye's mind was a little confused. He was clearly exploring a dilapidated spirit ship and was about to leave after finding nothing. However, at this moment, a fog shrouded over, and when the fog dissipated, it became this strange situation in front of him. The Long Dragon warship was obviously the name of the dilapidated spirit ship he had previously explored. Lu Yi could basically confirm this when he scanned with his divine sense. In terms of layout, the Long Dragon warship he was on now was exactly the same as the dilapidated spirit ship, except that one was intact and the other was dilapidated. What was going on? Even though Lu Yi had experienced some situations, he was still a little confused. The dilapidated spirit ship had transformed into a complete warship, and the originally empty spirit ship had more than a dozen constellation realm cultivators on it. He had even inexplicably become the captain of this galactic pirate gang. This matter was full of strangeness. Just as Lu Yi was pondering, Su Qingwei whispered, "Captain, are you okay?" Her identity was the ship doctor of the Long Dragon warship. Lu Ye's condition clearly didn't look right, so she naturally had to ask. Lu Yi didn't answer immediately and was still deep in thought. After a while, he said lightly, "I'm fine, just in a daze." He slowly sheathed the mountain pan saber. He was sure that these guys should know something about his situation, but they all looked like they didn't know anything, and Lu Yi couldn't ask directly. Not to mention whether they would tell him or not. The gap in strength was not something Lu Yi could bridge. He couldn't use force. The first and second officers of this Long Dragon warship were at the late stage of the Constellation realm. Lu Yi estimated that he could barely fight them one-on-one, but 1 against 2, he definitely couldn't win. Hearing him say this, the others breathed a sigh of relief. Qin Zong grinned. "Captain, you're really good. That saber was really sharp. It scared me." He wasn't lying. He was at the late stage of the Constellation realm, and Lu Yi was only at the early stage of the Constellation realm. The saber almost broke his protective spirit qi, which showed how extraordinary that saber was. Lu Yi didn't answer. He originally thought that this broken spirit boat was just a coincidence that he found it, but now it seemed that it had something to do with the opportunity that Feng Rumo pointed out before. Unfortunately, Feng Rumo didn't say anything at that time, so Lu Yi was now confused. The most important point was that it was obviously a broken spirit boat, but how did it turn into a perfect Long Dragon warship? And the ship was fully staffed. If it was an illusion, then it could still be explained. But what Lu Yi saw and what his body felt told him one thing. This was not an illusion, but reality. But Lu Yi could be sure of one thing. This was definitely an illusion. The thick fog was a catalyst, but the level of this illusion was too high, so high that he couldn't detect any flaws. If that was the case, then the people in front of him might not be living people. They might look no different from living people, but in reality, they might have been dead for a long time. His current position must still be on the broken spirit boat, but under the effect of the illusion, what he saw was a Long Dragon battleship that was in perfect condition. Chapter 1301. Slowly understanding his situation, Lu Yi immediately understood that this was a dangerous place and he should not stay for long. The information he had now seemed comprehensive, but in fact, it was useless. In such an environment, it was naturally better to slip away first. As for the opportunity Feng Rumo mentioned, no matter what it was more important to ensure his own safety first. Immediately he walked out. Su Qingwei followed closely. "Captain, are you really okay?" Lu Yi didn't want to pay attention to her, but after thinking about it he turned his head and said coldly, "I'm going out for a walk, don't follow me." Su Qingwei stopped. Lu Yi walked out of the cabin and found that he was now on the 3rd floor of the battleship, which was the floor where his doppelganger first explored. The place where he was just now was probably where the control center of the Long Dragon battleship was located. Looking up, he saw that the sky was covered with stars, and the Long Dragon battleship was sailing in the starry sky at this moment. Lu Yi tried to find the positions of the Sun Star and Venus that he was familiar with, but found nothing. This caused his heart to sink. The various unforeseen events from before were already inexplicable enough. Now, even the environment they were in had changed? He didn't have time to think about it. What he had to do now was to leave here quickly. His figure leaped and flew out, but soon, Lu Yi felt that something was wrong, because he found that no matter how he flew, he couldn't leave the spirit ship and could only stay within 100 feet of the spirit ship. The Long Dragon battleship seemed to have a magical power that firmly trapped him. Usually he couldn't feel it, but when he wanted to leave here, it would play a role. Such means were beyond the scope of his understanding. Sure enough, things were not so simple. Although he had been mentally prepared, when he discovered this problem, Lu Yi couldn't help but frown. It seemed that it was related to his current identity. His current identity was the captain of the Long Dragon battleship. Since he was the captain, he was naturally firmly tied to the Long Dragon battleship. As the saying goes, if the ship exists, he will exist. If the ship perishes, he will die. As soon as this thought popped up in his mind, Lu Ye's heart jumped, and he faintly had a feeling that a disaster was coming. Enemy attack! Suddenly, a loud shout resounded through the deck. Lu Yi looked in the direction of the voice and saw a young cultivator shouting a warning at the top of the mast. Lu Yi hurriedly looked around, and sure enough, he saw some traces in one direction. It was 3 warships that looked different from the Long Dragon battleship, and they were rapidly approaching in a triangular formation. In the distance, the front ends of the 3 battleships lit up. Obviously, they were accumulating power. When Lu Yi was in the 9 prefectures, he had come into contact with things like battleships. The 9 prefectures Grand Heaven Alliance had a type of flying dragon battleship that was specifically used to attack cities. It was extremely powerful and was not something that cultivators could compare to. If the battleships in the domain were like this, then there was no need to mention the battleships outside the domain. Who knew what level those 3 battleships were? Now that they were targeting the Long Dragon battleship, Lu Yi immediately felt that something was wrong. However, he couldn't fly away from the battleship. After the warning sound was heard, the crew members rushed over from all over the place, divided into the center of the array on the deck, and quickly began to perform their duties. One of the female crew members passed by Lu Yi and said, "Quickly go back to where you came from. Don't die too many times, otherwise you will never be able to escape." Lu Yi turned his head and looked at the back of the woman, faintly feeling that this woman seemed to be a little different from the other crew members. But at this moment, he didn't have time to think about this because Qin Zong had already arrived with a nervous expression. "Captain, quickly control the battleship." Lu Yi took one last look at the back of the woman before flying up to the cabin from before. Sweeping his gaze across the room, Zhang Xian immediately noticed a sphere at the center of the room, surrounded by a complex formation. This was the center of the Long Dragon battleship. Lu Yi quickly stepped forward, raised his hand, and placed it on the ball. His divine sense and spiritual energy surged and poured into the ball. The next moment, a wonderful feeling appeared all over his body. It was as if he had become one with the Long Dragon battleship. He was the Long Dragon battleship and the Long Dragon battleship was him. He could clearly feel every detail of the battleship and could also see the various advantages and disadvantages of the battleship. However, in the end, Lu Yi had no experience in operating a battleship, and just as he was experiencing this feeling, a chill suddenly ran down his spine. Looking up, his eyes were deep, seemingly able to penetrate the void, and he could clearly see 3 rays of light rushing towards the Long Dragon battleship in a triangular formation. It was the attack launched by the 3 battleships he had just seen on the deck. Lu Yi instinctively wanted to dodge, but at this moment his mind had merged with the Long Dragon battleship, so dodging was not so easy. He needed to control the battleship to dodge. This was completely different from controlling his own body. The Long Dragon battleship shook violently as the first attack arrived. Although it was unable to dodge, the crew of the Long Dragon battleship were well trained and had already activated the protective array. When this attack hit the light curtain of the array, it suddenly rippled. This was followed by a second, then a third. Lu Yi tried his best to control the warship, but he was one step too late. Although the continuous barrage of attacks failed to break through the protective barrier of the formation, they were still able to send the Long Dragon warship flying through the air with the force of the barrage of attacks. It was not only the battleship that was sent flying, but also Lu Ye's mind. In Lu Ye's mind, at this moment, he was like a flying target, completely unable to control his body, let alone dodge the following attacks. Qin Zong anxiously jumped to the side, urging his spiritual energy to stabilize his mind while shouting, "Captain, quickly dodge. Do you think I don't know how to dodge? I need to have some kind of ability." Lu Yi almost cursed it out loud. As a person who had never controlled a battleship of this type before, there were just too many inconsistencies. In just 10 breaths of time, the protective light curtain of the Long Dragon battleship was broken, and when the bright rays of light once again attacked, Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh. The starry sky. Sure enough, it was dangerous. He never thought that his life would come to an end like this. The attacks of the triangular formation broke the protective light curtain and slammed into the hull of the battleship, causing the crew on the deck to scream and die one by one. Lu Yi didn't struggle and just calmly accepted it all, because at this moment, any struggle was meaningless. At the last moment of his life, Hua Xi's face appeared in his mind. He didn't know. Would that woman really give birth to a child for him? Amidst this tranquility, Lu Yi suddenly sensed something strange. Turning his head, he saw that Qin Zong and the others were all looking at him. The fear and despair from before had disappeared without a trace. Instead, they were all looking at him with a strange smile. Under the white light, all life on the Long Dragon battleship was extinguished. Even the entire battleship was in tatters. Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes and gasped for breath. The feeling of death was incomparably palpitating, but soon he showed a puzzled look. Because at that moment he clearly felt that he had died, so how did he come back to life? Using his divine sense, Lu Yi checked his body and found no traces of injury or damage. What's going on? Looking left and right, he saw Qin Zong and the others, and he was now in the control center of the battleship. Seeing Lu Yi look over, Xiao Jianming said, "Captain, what are your orders?" Lu Yi stared at him for a while and slowly shook his head. Strange. Too strange. Lu Yi didn't believe in resurrection. Even if someone had this ability, it couldn't be popularized. But in fact, in his divine sense perception, the crew of the battleship who had died just now were all alive and well. It was as if everything he had experienced just now was an illusion. But was that really just an illusion? If it was too real. Lu Yi clearly felt the pain of his body being torn apart when he died. "Captain, are you feeling unwell?" Su Qingwei asked with concern. Lu Yi looked at her with a dazed expression. Just before he died, these guys in front of him all turned their heads and smiled strangely at him, especially Su Qingwei. At that time, her back was clearly facing him, but her head was turned around. At this moment, it was as if nothing had happened. "No," Lu Yi replied stiffly. Qin Zong laughed. "It's our captain's first time sailing, so he must be nervous. Back then, didn't we all go through it like this? Captain, let me tell you, there's no need to be nervous. When it comes to robbing, you get used to it the first time, the second time, and the third time, you'll get used to it." "What's wrong with you?" Lu Yi asked. The few of them were confused. Lu Yi changed his question, "What's the situation just now?" Their expressions became even more confused. Qin Zong scratched his head. "Captain, what are you talking about? What happened just now?" Lu Yi stared at their expressions closely, but he didn't find any flaws, which made him doubt himself. However, at this moment, a shout suddenly came from the direction of the deck's observation deck: "Enemy attack!" Throughout the battleship, the crew who were resting scattered immediately moved, rushing to the deck and performing their duties. Lu Ye's expression stiffened. He quickly raised his hand and pressed it on the ball in front of him. The next moment, the feeling he had experienced before rushed to his heart, and he seemed to have merged with the dragon battleship. His gaze pierced through the void again and saw that in the depths of the starry sky, 3 battleships were rushing over in a triangular formation, and the top of the 3 battleships were shining brightly. This scene was so familiar that it was as though time had turned back. The corners of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. Qin Zong shouted, "Captain, quickly control the battleship." Chapter 1302. The fierce bombardment continued, and the Long Dragon battleship's protective light curtain was on the brink of collapse. Lu Ye's mind was completely immersed, and although he tried his best to dodge, he was still unable to catch up. This time, the Long Dragon battleship lasted a few breaths longer than the last time, but that was all. The Long Dragon battleship's protective light was broken, and a bright and dazzling light once again filled their field of vision, causing them to be unable to open their eyes. Lu Yi opened his eyes again and calmly looked around. Sure enough, he was still alive, just like before, standing in front of the Long Dragon battleship's control center. Even Qin Zong and the others' original positions had not changed. Was this really a reversal of time? Or was it a strange reincarnation? "Captain, do you have any orders?" Xiao Jianming asked the same question as before. Lu Yi shook his head. "No." Turning to look at Su Qingwei, he said, "There's nothing wrong with my body, so there's no need to ask." Su Qingwei opened her mouth, somewhat at a loss. Standing in place, Lu Yi pondered. According to the current situation, He was afraid that they would soon be attacked again. There were only two choices in front of him. One was to leave the Long Dragon battleship before the attack arrived, but he had already tried before, and it simply did not work. There was a mysterious force that trapped him on the Long Dragon battleship, preventing him from flying more than 1,000 feet away. So, in fact, he only had one choice. Control the Long Dragon battleship and fight with the 3 attacking battleships. Defeat them, defeat them. A battle between battleships was not the same as a battle between cultivators. Lu Yi had already experienced this twice before. No matter how many methods he had, he could not use them while controlling the Long Dragon battleship. All he could rely on was his experience in controlling the Long Dragon battleship and the Long Dragon battleship's performance. Lu Yi was not clear about the performance of the Long Dragon battleship, but it should not be bad because in the previous 2 attacks, the Long Dragon battleship had withstood one attack after another, and the Long Dragon battleship's protective light curtain had still been able to maintain until it could not hold on any longer. During this process, if Lu Yi could control the Long Dragon battleship to make the right dodges and avoid a portion of the attacks, then the crew of the Long Dragon battleship could better maintain the protective light curtain, and the time it could hold on would inevitably be greatly increased. Looking for an opportunity to destroy the enemy's Long Dragon battleship was the real way of fighting between battleships. There weren't as many tricks as fights between cultivators, but the level of danger wasn't any lower. Of course, if the strength of a cultivator's tenant body reached a certain level, then there was no need to go through so much trouble. They could just go into battle alone and destroy whatever battleships they had. But for Lu Yi, he had never had a deep understanding of battleships before, so he didn't know how to operate a battleship more effectively and conveniently. Suddenly asking him to face 3 enemy battleships of unknown origin in the starry sky was too much of a stretch. Hence, Lu Yi thought of an idea. He turned to look at Qin Zong and the others. Which one of you can control the warship? Since he couldn't do it himself, he would let someone else do it. Qin Zong smiled. All of us know how to do it. This was normal. Most of the space pirates who plundered the universe all year round knew how to operate a battleship. It could only be said that there were good and bad techniques. Who's the strongest? Lu Yi asked again. Qin Zong smiled proudly. Of course it's me. Then I'll leave it to you, Lu Yi said. Qin Zong immediately revealed a look of joy. Really? If I tell you to do it, then do it. There wasn't much time left, so Lu Yi didn't have the time to say anything more to him. Qin Zong immediately stepped forward and stood in front of the central sphere that controlled the battleship. His expression suddenly became extremely serious as he asked again, Captain, do you really want to transfer control to me? Cut the crap. Lu Yi urged impatiently. Then I'll do it. Qin Zong chuckled and raised his hand to press on the sphere, not forgetting to remind Lu Yi, Captain, please assist me so that the transfer of control can be smooth. Lu Yi didn't know what to do, so he nodded. You can do it yourself. Qin Zong immediately poured his spiritual power into the sphere. The next moment, Lu Yi understood and realized how to cooperate with him. This sphere was originally filled with his aura, so he had the highest level of control over the Long Dragon battleship. Of course, the other crew members also had some control, but Lu Yi's control was the highest priority. What he needed to do now was to disperse his aura while Qin Zong was doing it. Once the sphere was filled with Qin Zong's aura, the Long Dragon battleship would be under his control. The transfer of control wasn't something that could be done in an instant, but it wouldn't take long. This thing was like a business transaction, one willing to buy and the other willing to sell. But during this process, Lu Yi inexplicably felt that something was wrong. As for what was wrong, he couldn't say. Glancing around, he suddenly discovered that Xiao Jianming and Su Qingwei were staring at the sphere, the corners of their mouths blooming with the same strange smile that Lu Yi had seen before. Looking up at Qin Zong again, this guy was actually smiling. The feeling of uneasiness became even stronger, as if once he lost control of the Long Dragon battleship, something terrible would happen. Lu Yi immediately withdrew his hand. Qin Zong was stunned. Captain, what's wrong? Lu Yi was silent for a moment before saying, I won't trouble you. Qin Zong shrugged indifferently, as if he wasn't disappointed. Looking at Xiao Jianming and Su Qingwei, they had also returned to normal. Enemy attack. The familiar shout came from the observation deck again. Lu Yi sighed, stepped forward, poured his spirit power into the sphere, and began to control the Long Dragon battleship. But because of the previous transfer of control, there was a part of Qin Zong's aura in the sphere of the control center. Normally, Lu Yi would be able to disperse this aura with a little time, but at this moment, where could he find the time? He immediately felt that controlling the Long Dragon battleship was not as smooth as the previous 2 times, and there was always a hint of obscurity. He wasn't familiar with it, and with such a disadvantage in the starry sky, the Long Dragon battleship's performance was even more worrying. This time, the Long Dragon battleship didn't last long before it was blown up. In the 4th cycle, when Lu Yi opened his eyes, he felt that something was wrong. Between himself and the Long Dragon battleship, there seemed to be a strange connection. This connection was completely different from the previous feeling. It was not a meaningless connection between the Long Dragon battleship and the captain's identity, but a real, unclear connection. There was no such connection in the previous cycles. Lu Yi originally planned to wait until this cycle to directly control the Long Dragon battleship and practice his control skills at the same time to deal with the next crisis. Anyway, under such a cycle, he would not really die, so as long as he took advantage of the time before the enemy attacked, he could be a qualified captain and lead the crew on the Long Dragon battleship to fight against the enemy. But now that such a sudden change had occurred, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Since stepping on this Long Dragon battleship, there was a strange feeling everywhere, and now this thing was even stranger. Lu Yi began to investigate this connection, but he couldn't find it clearly. Suddenly, he remembered that during the 1st cycle, a female crew member passed by him and said something. That woman told him not to die too many times, otherwise he would never be able to get rid of it. At that time, he had no idea what the woman was talking about, and he didn't have the time to ask in detail. Now, it seemed that it had something to do with his current changes. This was the 4th cycle, and he had died 3 times before, so he had a mysterious connection with the Long Dragon battleship. If he died more times, would this connection become stronger until he was trapped on this Long Dragon battleship forever, unable to get rid of it? During Lu Ye's 2nd cycle, he had asked Qin Zong and the others, trying to get some information from them, but those guys didn't know anything. Now, it seemed that if he wanted to get information, he had to find that woman. She seemed to be a little different from the others. With a surge of divine sense, Lu Yi immediately found the location of the woman and rushed out. Although practicing the skills of controlling a Long Dragon battleship was very important, sharpening the axe would not delay the work of cutting firewood. Lu Yi felt that it was more important to first inquire about some information, at least to understand what had happened to him. Qin Zong's voice came from behind. "Captain, where are you going?" "I have something to do, don't follow me," Lu Yi bluntly ordered. He didn't have a good impression of Qin Zong and the others. They didn't seem to have anything wrong with them, but in fact, they were all strange, especially their smiles, which made Lu Yi feel very uncomfortable. The location of the woman was in a room on the 2nd floor of the Long Dragon battleship. Lu Yi accurately found this place and was about to raise his hand to knock on the door when it was opened, and a pretty face appeared in front of him. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment, but soon realized that this woman knew that he was coming. It seemed that he had found the right person to look for. Their eyes met silently, and the woman turned sideways. Lu Yi stepped in, and the woman closed the door and activated the restriction in the room. The furnishings in the room were very simple, and Lu Yi didn't have the intention to look at it too much. He went straight to the point. "Did fellow Taoists teach me?" The woman sighed and didn't answer, but asked, "How should I address you?" The woman nodded and introduced herself. "Hai Tang. Fellow Taoist cultivation is higher than mine. If you don't mind, I'll call you senior sister," Lu Yi said. Seeing that the other party had no intention to refuse, he took the opportunity to ask, "Senior sister Hai Tang, what's going on here?" A senior sister was always more amiable than a fellow Taoist. At this time, he should try to get closer to her. Hai Tang said, "Tell me what you know first." "I don't know anything. I only know that after I die, I will come back to life again, just like reincarnation, Lu Yi said truthfully. Reincarnation? Hai Tang smiled bitterly. If it was really just reincarnation, then it would be fine, but this kind of reincarnation will only make you sink deeper and deeper. You came to find me because you should have noticed the strange connection between you and this long dragon battleship. Chapter 1303. That's right. Lu Yi nodded. It was because he noticed the strange connection during this reincarnation that he remembered the woman's previous warning and came to find her. Hai Tang said, this connection will become closer and closer as you die more and more times, until you and the ghost ship are completely integrated into one and can no longer be separated. The ghost ship? Lu Yi looked at her in confusion. Yes, this dragon warship is the famous ghost ship in the starry sky. No one knows how it appeared, but the recorded history can be traced back to tens of thousands of years ago. Listening to Hai Tang's words, the ghost ship seemed to be very famous in the starry sky, but Lu Yi, as a fledgling who had just entered the starry sky, had never heard of the ghost ship. Not to mention him, no one in the entire 9 regions knew about it. The ghost ship drifts around in the starry sky, and it may appear anywhere. Before entering, it looks like a broken warship from the outside, but any creature that sets foot on it will trigger a change in the ghost ship. This change should be the thick fog that Lu Yi had seen before. When the fog dissipated, the broken spirit boat would transform into the Long Dragon battleship, and the person who broke in would naturally become the captain of the Long Dragon battleship. Lu Yi asked, is this change real or an illusion? Hai Tang said, for you, it's an illusion, but for me, it's real. What's the difference? You haven't completely integrated into the ghost ship, so you still have a chance to get rid of it, but I? Hai Tang's expression was a little sad. Lu Yi suddenly understood, Senior Martial Sister, were you also attracted by this ship and trapped in it? Hai Tang nodded, I fell here not long ago, and I have experienced everything you have. Lu Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Since Senior Martial Sister knows that this is the famous ghost ship, why do you still want to explore it? Hai Tang smiled bitterly, I only realized it after I came in. Shaking her head, she continued, now that I'm trapped here, I can still maintain my sanity for a short period of time, but after a long time, I will die. Everything about me will become the nutrients of this ghost ship. You came at the right time. If you came a few months later, you wouldn't be able to see me. The other crew members won't tell you these things. They are the original existence of the Long Dragon battleship. Lu Yi suddenly understood. No wonder Hai Tang reminded him in the first reincarnation. It turned out that she was indeed different from the other crew members. No matter who the other crew members were, they were all part of the Spectre ship, but Hai Tang was an outsider like him. Although she was trapped now, she still maintained her rationality, which was why she kindly reminded Lu Yi. She was willing to hold an umbrella over him because she was in the rain. However, this state was destined to not last long. After a while, she would completely vanish into thin air. Lu Yi was worried and asked, then what should I do to get rid of it? Take control of the dragon warship and lead the crew members to defeat the invading enemies. Then you can get rid of the ship and regain your freedom. This was exactly what Lu Yi had wanted to do before, but it was just a thought. Doing it was not so easy. Everything else aside, this was already the 4th cycle, and Lu Yi was not even familiar with controlling the warship, let alone engaging in aerial combat with the 3 invading warships. There is a mystery about the ghost ship. Hai Tang also knew that Lu Yi did not have much time, so she spoke faster. No matter what cultivation level a person has, they can only display the strength of the early constellation realm. Even the Sunshine realm is no exception. This is the rule of the ghost ship. Lu Yi didn't know this because he himself was at the early constellation realm, so this rule was meaningless to him. This rule is extremely harsh and greatly limits the strength of a cultivator. Therefore, even if they know that there is an opportunity on the ghost ship, cultivators who know it in the starry sky will not rashly barge in. Generally, when they see it, they will stay far away. Opportunity? Lu Yi raised his eyebrows. There is an opportunity here? Hai Tang smiled. There is naturally an opportunity in such a dangerous place, especially for a strange existence like the ghost ship. However, if you can't defeat the invaders, you won't be able to get the opportunity. Lu Yi could now confirm that the opportunity Feng Rumo had mentioned was really the Long Dragon battleship. He couldn't help but curse inwardly. That sloppy old man did tell him that there was danger in this opportunity and asked him to decide on his own. However, before entering the ghost ship, he didn't see any danger at all. By the time he came in, it was already too late. Feng Rumo's reminder was equivalent to not saying anything. However, he couldn't blame him. They were strangers who met by chance. He took some of Lu Ye's food, wine, and meat. Not only did he give Lu Yi an opportunity, but he also sealed a secret technique on his Pan Shan saber. From Feng Rumo's point of view, they were even. As for whether Lu Yi would die because of the ghost ship, what did it have to do with him? There were dangers everywhere in the starry sky. Even if the ghost ship didn't exist, there would be other ships. Furthermore, cultivators died almost every moment in the starry sky for various reasons. What kind of opportunity? Lu Yi asked. Haitang said, it said that there are all kinds of treasures on the ghost ship. Even sunshine cultivators would be tempted by them. If you can get off the ship and regain your freedom, you can choose any item on the ship and take it away. Treasures that even sunshine cultivators would be tempted by. What kind of treasure is it? If that's the case, then it's understandable why the ghost ship can make such a name for itself in the starry sky. Such a fortuitous encounter would definitely attract heroes from all over to temper themselves. As a group of cultivators, there had never been a lack of adventurous genes. Senior Sister Haitang, I think we can cooperate. Lu Yi suggested. How? Haitang looked at him, puzzled. Since Senior Sister has experienced everything I've experienced, then you must be more familiar with the control of the warship than me. How about this? I'll transfer the control of the warship to you. You? No. Before Lu Yi could finish speaking, Haitang interrupted him. She looked at Lu Yi with a serious face. You can't transfer the control of the ghost ship to me. The control of the ship is the foundation of your identity as the captain. With this control, you'll be the captain and can continue the test of the ghost ship. But once you lose this control, you'll immediately be in the same situation as me. You'll be trapped on this ship until the day you turn into nutrients for the ghost ship. Lu Yi finally understood why he felt so uneasy when he was about to transfer the control of the warship to Qin Zone. It turned out that there was such a trick. Fortunately, he realized that something was wrong and stopped the transfer. Otherwise, he would really follow in Haitang's footsteps. At that time, the two of them would probably be staring at each other with tears in their eyes. Qin Zong and the other bastards must have known the consequences of transferring the control of the ship, but none of them reminded him. Instead, they all had strange smiles on their faces during the transfer. Enemy attack. On the deck, the stern warning of the lookout sounded again. In the next moment, the crew on the Long Dragon battleship began to move. Lu Yi didn't have much time left. He hurriedly asked, Senior Sister, do you have any other instructions? Haitang said, although all the crew members on the ghost ship are part of the ship, as long as you're the captain, they will strictly follow your every order. This is also one of the rules of the ghost ship. Make good use of this. In history, many cultivators have fallen into the ghost ship. Not to mention constellations, there were even sunshine cultivators. However, there were also precedents of successfully escaping and leaving with precious treasures. The universe is not set yet. Don't give up until the very end. Got it. He turned and ran out. Halfway there, he heard Qin Zong shouting in panic, Captain, come back and take control of the warship. Don't be noisy. Lu Yi rushed past him and went straight to the cabin. Soon he arrived in front of the ball. He stood still and poured spiritual power into it. 10 breaths later, the dragon warship exploded. Under the powerful attack of the invaders, none of the crew members on the ship survived. When Lu Yi opened his eyes in the 5th reincarnation, he immediately checked the strange connection between himself and the dragon warship. He found that it was indeed closer. This connection would continue to deepen as he died more and more times. When it reached a certain limit, Lu Yi would become like Haitang, completely trapped here and unable to escape. Therefore, everything he experienced at this moment was what Haitang had experienced before. Alone in such a strange environment, he slowly walked towards the end. If his mind wasn't strong enough, he would soon collapse. Lu Yi didn't know how many times he could die. He couldn't make an accurate judgment because he didn't feel it too deeply. However, he still had a long way to go to get rid of the ghost ship. This kind of death wasn't real because everything he experienced at this moment was just an illusion. However, this illusion was unfolded under the rules of the ghost ship. It was too clever, and Lu Yi couldn't see any flaws. Calming his mind, Lu Yi immediately raised his hand and pressed it on the ball of the control center. His mind connected with the dragon warship and he began to familiarize himself with the controls of the warship. But before that, he first had the dragon warship speed up and escape into the distance. His thinking was very simple. Since there was a strong enemy chasing after him, he should speed up first and try to open up a little more distance and delay a little more time. But soon, Lu Yi knew that he was overthinking it. Because when the familiar enemy attack was shouted, Lu Yi found that he didn't delay any extra time. At the same time, the crew on the lookout tower issued a warning. What was going on? With no time to think, Lu Yi continued to control the dragon warship to fly forward. A moment later, the enemy's warship caught up, and the distance between them was constantly closing. Huge beams of light-like attacks were constantly sweeping from behind. Under Lu Ye's control, the warship flipped and moved, avoiding most of the attacks. However, some of them still fell on the protective light curtain, causing it to tremble. Chapter 1304. However, because Lu Yi controlled the warship to avoid many attacks, the protective light curtain lasted much longer than before, and this was also thanks to the efforts of the crew. Although the crew of the ghost ship were part of the warship, they did not slack off in the slightest when encountering the enemy and did their best, which should be good news. If in such an environment, even his own crew couldn't work together with him, then there was no need to continue this test, it was meaningless at all. In the sixth reincarnation, Lu Yi controlled the warship as usual and accelerated to escape into the distance. At the same time, he took out 2 twin chi-connected array discs from his storage ring and threw them to Qinzong, shouting, "You guys, take this thing and summon all the crew to the deck to set up a defense, there will be a strong enemy attacking soon." The twin chi-connected array discs had made great contributions in the fight against the insect nest in 9 regions and the expedition to the blood-refining world, allowing many cultivators of 9 regions to borrow each other's strength and easily form an array. It was a good choice to use it here. Although the crew members were all constellations, their cultivations varied, and their spiritual energy varied. As a result, when they controlled the formation on the deck, the power displayed by the formation was different. With the help of the identical chi-linked branch formation disc, they could cooperate better with each other. Qinzong shouted, "Yes." Immediately he rushed to the deck with Xiao Jianming and Su Qingwei. Sure enough, as Haitang said, although these guys had bad intentions towards Lu Yi, they still strictly followed his orders. Lu Yi stood alone, immersed in his mind, constantly familiarizing himself with the various controls of the warship. Still at the same time, a warning cry sounded. Hearing the sound, Lu Yi knew that this was probably one of the rules of the ghost ship. No matter how hard he tried to speed up before, he could not achieve the purpose of stalling for time. The place of attack would always appear in the vision of the lookout at the same time. Soon the battle began. The effect this time was gratifying. Under the control of Lu Yi and the efforts of the crew, the long dragon warship lasted for almost an incense stick's worth of time before it was destroyed. Lu Yi discovered that he was quite talented in piloting a battleship, which might have something to do with his background as a weapon cultivator. Weapon cultivators were originally good at close combat. When controlling a warship, they only needed to replace their individual bodies with the warship, which meant that the entire warship was their own body. Although it was more difficult to control, as long as they found the trick and familiarized themselves with it, they would be able to control it. If it had been a spell cultivator, it would not have been so simple. In addition, Lu Yi also found a piece of information that was beneficial to him. The deeper he immersed his mind and the more spiritual energy he injected, the easier it would be to control the warship. These things couldn't be taught by others. One had to experience them deeply themselves. Lu Yi estimated that if he could escape this dangerous situation, he should be able to easily control any battleships or similar objects in the future. This could also be considered as a form of training. After all, it was not a bad thing to have one more skill. But soon, Lu Yi discovered another problem. His own consumption was too great, and he finally understood why Spectre Ship had a rule that no matter what cultivation level a cultivator entered this place, they could only display the strength of the early constellation realm. Because the early constellation realm was the starting point of the upper realm, the spiritual energy reserve was also the least. And controlling a warship consumed a huge amount of spiritual energy. With this level of consumption, a cultivator in the early constellation realm would probably not be able to last for more than 6 hours even if they used all their cultivation. Even if they could use spirit pills to recover halfway, it would not last for too long. In particular, if one wanted to better control the Long Dragon warship, they would need to pay more spiritual energy and accelerate the consumption of the cultivator's own spiritual energy. In other words, once a cultivator entered this ship, they must pass the test within a few hours. Only then could they leave and obtain opportunities. Once the time was delayed, the situation would only become more and more unfavorable and eventually fall into a vicious cycle. At that time, they could only wait for death. Haitang did not tell Lu Yi about this. She didn't know if it was because she was pressed for time at that time, or she felt that there was no need to say it, as Lu Yi would be able to detect it himself. This problem was a huge difficulty for other cultivators, but for Lu Yi, it was really not a problem. He cultivated with the help of spiritual jades, so he had to control the rhythm to achieve the best efficiency. After realizing the problem of excessive spiritual energy consumption, Lu Yi immediately stuffed a spiritual jade into his mouth and chewed it. As for the waste of spiritual jade energy caused by doing this, it was already at this time, so there was no need to care about waste. When he left the 9 regions, he had about 15,000 spiritual jades on him. Now, the number had almost no change, because what he found along the way was basically enough to meet his daily needs for cultivation. In the early constellation realm, the consumption of spiritual jades was, after all, very little. In the 7th reincarnation, Lu Yi turned his head and saw Qin Zong and the other 2 standing foolishly at the side like 3 quails. Seeing him look over, Xiao Jianming asked the familiar question again, "Captain, do you have any orders? What about the things I gave you?" The 3 of them were all at a loss. Qin Zong asked, "What things?" Lu Yi knew that after the reincarnation, everything before had been reconstructed. The 2 twin chi-connected branches array discs he gave them before must have been thrown away. He immediately threw out 2 array discs and gave the same order as before. After the 3 of them left, Lu Yi began to familiarize himself with the control of the warship again. This time, he did not waste energy to increase his speed. On the other hand, no matter how fast he increased his speed, the enemy's attack would arrive on time, so he might as well not waste energy. He just urged his spiritual energy to pour into the ball in the control center. While controlling the warship, he familiarized himself with every array on the warship and the power of every treasure placed in the array. The fierce battle broke out again, but rather than calling it a battle, it was better to say that they were passively taking a beating. Although with Lu Ye's order, Qin Zong and the others also tried to counterattack while resisting the enemy's attacks on the deck. This kind of counterattack required Lu Ye's cooperation. Because Lu Yi controlled the direction and movement of the warship, if his cooperation with the crew was insufficient, it would be difficult to carry out an effective counterattack. Qin Zong stimulated the power of the array several times, but it hit empty air because he could not aim accurately. In such a situation, the defeat of the Long Dragon warship was only a matter of time. What Lu Yi needed to do was to survive as long as possible, so that he could continue to accumulate experience in controlling the warship. The 8th time, the 9th time, the 10th time, unlike the other crew members, Haitang paid close attention to the changes in the warship every time, so that she could infer Lu Ye's state. For the first few times, she had been delighted because Lu Yi was clearly improving rapidly in the process of piloting the warship, much better than her previous performance. This improvement could be felt directly, and the warship was able to last longer under the enemy's attacks. But soon she found that something was wrong because Lu Yi had been dodging and did not counterattack. Gradually, she sighed, knowing that if the situation continued to develop like this, no matter how much Lu Yi's skill in controlling the warship improved, it would be useless. The spiritual energy reserve of an early-stage constellation realm cultivator was not enough to support long-term control. Once Lu Yi's spiritual power was exhausted, the long dragon battleship would become a sitting duck. It would no longer have the ability to evade. Death after death would slowly bind Lu Yi to the ghost ship, making it impossible for him to escape. She did not believe that Lu Yi did not notice this problem, but since he had noticed it, why didn't he change it? As time passed, she slowly realized that something was wrong. The long dragon warship was still nimbly dodging, and the expected situation of Lu Yi's spiritual energy being exhausted and causing the warship to become a sitting duck did not happen. Hai Tang could not understand, this junior brother Lu Yi's spiritual energy reserve was so deep. This should not be something an early-stage constellation realm cultivator should have. But in any case, this was actually happening. If this situation could be maintained, it seemed there was hope. The 16th time. Lu Yi could clearly feel that his connection with the long dragon battleship had become very strong. Although he didn't have to worry about the consumption of spiritual energy, there was one thing that couldn't be ignored: there was a limit to his death. Once this limit was exceeded, no matter how hard he tried, it would all be in vain. 20 times. This was the maximum number of deaths he could achieve. Once this number was exceeded, he would be in danger. So there were not many opportunities left for him. Fortunately, after death, his control of the long dragon warship had reached a level where he could command it like an extension of his arm, and there was no longer the sense of uncoordinated and obscure control he had at the beginning. This was normal. After all, cultivators were not mortals, especially those in the constellation realm. Even if they had not come into contact with certain things before, as long as they had enough time, they could quickly master it. Controlling a warship was not too difficult. The biggest problem cultivators faced when they came here was the terrifying consumption of spiritual energy, which was the fundamental reason why many cultivators fell to the Spectre ship. In the past, when cultivators came here after experiencing several reincarnations, they all became aware of the problem of spiritual power reserves and inevitably had to calculate the consumption of their own spiritual power. However, this problem was not a problem for Lu Yi at all. He maintained the maximum amount of spiritual power from beginning to end. Of course, this had nothing to do with the size of the long dragon warship. After all, it was a warship suitable for more than 10 people to sail together. In the starry sky, it could only be regarded as a small warship. If it was a large warship, it would not be so easy for Lu Yi to control it. In this reincarnation, the number and frequency of the enemy's attacks on the long dragon warship was obviously reduced to a limit. In this state, even if it was accidentally hit, as long as the protective array was not broken for a while, the crew could quickly make up for it and face the next attack. In other words, if there was enough spiritual energy, the long dragon warship could continue to entangle with the enemy like this until the end of time. Chapter 1305. Lu Yi could persist, but the crew could not. After all, their spiritual power consumption could not be quickly replenished, even with the help of the identical spirit connecting branch array disk. Therefore, when he noticed that the spiritual power reserves of the crew had decreased to a certain level, Lu Yi suddenly steered the long dragon battleship to change direction and collide with the enemy. In the previous entanglement, Lu Yi determined one thing, that was, the speed of the long dragon battleship was not as fast as the 3 enemy ships chasing them. This was a matter of course. If they were really faster than the enemy ships, there would be no follow-up trouble. It was the same principle as when he tried to fly in the starry sky before. The speed of the long dragon battleship was the limit of what he could control. If he exceeded this limit, he might hit something head-on, causing the ship to be destroyed and the crew to die. Lu Yi's speed was inferior to the enemy's, and he was unable to shake them off. Now, Lu Yi wanted to know how hard these 3 enemy ships were. But it should not be too outrageous. The ghost ship had its own rules, and under these rules, there was often a glimmer of hope. If the hardness of the 3 enemy ships was so strong that the Long Dragon battleship could not break through, then this was not a test or an opportunity at all, but a land of death. In the past, it was impossible for anyone to pass this test and take the benefits from the ghost ship. Therefore, Lu Yi felt that the strength of these 3 enemy ships should not be too outrageous. At the very least, it was to the extent that the current Long Dragon battleship could break through. When the Long Dragon battleship changed direction and collided head-on with the enemy ships, Lu Yi gave orders to Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming. The Long Dragon battleship had a defensive array formation, so naturally, it also had an offensive array formation. Under the leadership of Su Qingwei, the ordinary crew members controlled the defensive array formation, while Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming controlled the offensive array formation. These array formations were equipped with powerful treasures, so they could display extremely powerful killing power. Although they were both offensive arrays, the types were not the same. The array controlled by Qin Zong was more powerful, but it took a longer time to accumulate power, so it could not attack continuously. The array controlled by Xiao Jiaming was slightly less powerful, but the attack frequency was much higher. Lu Yi had already investigated this point, and he had also witnessed the scene of his 2 right-hand men activating the array in the previous reincarnation. However, their previous counterattacks were basically ineffective, mainly because they didn't cooperate well enough. This time, it was different. Lu Yi wanted to test the toughness of the enemy battleships. He charged towards the 3 enemy battleships. He didn't move around in a large area, only dodging on a small scale. This way, Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming could better grasp the direction of their attacks. Beams of light came from the front, and the Long Dragon battleship unleashed its fury. Although there was a difference in speed, in terms of attack power, the Long Dragon battleship was not inferior to the enemy battleship. In fact, it was even stronger. After all, it was impossible to fight 1 against 3 without a strong enough attack. The process of approaching each other was a matter of life and death. Lu Ye's mind was focused on the enemy ship being attacked through the battleship. This was the warship in the middle, and the enemy was also moving and dodging. However, Xiao Jiaming was obviously very skilled in controlling the formation, and by relying on the high frequency of the formation, he was able to continuously activate the power of the formation to lock down the direction of the enemy warship. Often, a seemingly aimless attack actually had other uses. Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming also had a tacit understanding, and they cooperated well. Taking advantage of the opportunities created by Xiao Jiaming, every attack hit. Even if Lu Yi knew that these 2 guys didn't have good intentions towards him, he couldn't help but cheer for them at this moment. It had to be said that some of the special rules of the ghost ship were still very beneficial to the cultivators who broke into this place. For example, at this moment, under Lu Ye's command, all the crew could strictly carry out, without the slightest bit of deception. In the blink of an eye, they were less than 10 miles away from each other. For such a large battleship, 10 miles was equivalent to face-to-face. At this time, the protective light curtain of the Long Dragon battleship had become extremely dim. Even if Lu Yi controlled the battleship with all his strength, it was difficult to avoid all the attacks when they were so close to each other. Fortunately, he had distributed the Kindred Spirit Connection Array disc before, so the crew could borrow each other's strength at any time to repair the defense. Otherwise, the situation would have been worse. Looking at the enemy ship targeted by the Long Dragon battleship, the protective light curtain was also shaking, but the situation was slightly better than the Long Dragon battleship. After all, they had to bear the attacks of 3 enemy ships, but the enemy only had to bear the attacks of 1 ship. The intensity of the attacks was different, so the reaction of the protective array was naturally different. Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming's cooperation had made a great contribution. The 2 enemy battleships on the left and right continued to attack, and the battleship in the middle began to move, obviously wanting to avoid the collision of the Long Dragon battleship. But how could Lu Yi let it avoid? This time, he wanted to see how hard the other party was. If he didn't destroy it, how could he be sure? Immediately, he increased the spirit power, and the Long Dragon battleship's speed sharply increased. In the next moment, the two battleships collided, and after a short squeeze, a huge burst of light suddenly burst out. Lu Yi only felt his mind shake, and for some reason, he felt like he had hit something solid. In the process of controlling the battleship, he was closely connected with the battleship. He could observe everything in the surroundings through the battleship and could also control it flexibly. It could be said that the battleship was him, and he was the battleship. This was probably the fundamental reason why his connection with the battleship was getting closer and closer after dying again and again. Enduring a lot of discomfort, Lu Yi hurriedly observed. In his perception, the Long Dragon battleship and the enemy ship that had been hit had become tattered, and their respective protective arrays had collapsed. Before Lu Yi could observe any further, streaks of light flooded his vision from left and right. And then there was no more, and when Lu Yi opened his eyes, he had already entered the 17th reincarnation. For a moment, he cursed in his heart. That enemy ship even attacked its own people. It was simply too cruel. At the end of the reincarnation, his side and the enemy's battleship in the middle could be said to have perished together, but the cultivators on the battleship were still alive. Lu Yi originally wanted to see what kind of enemies were on the enemy ship, but in the end, he didn't have a chance to investigate at all before he was blown to pieces. Without too much time to sigh, Lu Yi issued the same orders as before, and at the same time, threw out 2 more array discs. After the reincarnation, everything on the Long Dragon battleship would be reversed, and the array discs he took out before were all gone. However, there were also benefits. That was, the spiritual power consumed by the crew before would be restored, allowing each crew member to maintain their peak state. This was also the reason why Lu Yi brazenly crashed into the enemy ship at the end of the last reincarnation. At that time, the crew's spiritual power consumption was already too great, and they simply couldn't support the following battle. In that case, it was better to do a test and then start over. Including this time, there were 4 more chances, so Lu Yi didn't dare to be careless. After the crew listened to the order and took their positions, Lu Yi immediately controlled the battleship and turned around. Even so, it was still at the fixed time that the 3 enemy ships' ferocious figures were imprinted in their field of vision, but this time was different from every previous time. The Long Dragon battleship was no longer the passive side, but the one that took the initiative to attack. In the process of approaching each other, the probing attacks have already begun, and as the distance between each other increased, the intensity and frequency of the attacks began to increase. With the previous experience, Lu Yi was able to control the battleship more smoothly this time. He put more energy into cooperating with Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming. This was also what a qualified captain should do, because only by cooperating with the 2 of them, the offensive arrays they controlled could play the greatest role. The effect was very obvious. In this entanglement, the Long Dragon battleship only paid the price of half the power of the defensive array to destroy the defense of one of the enemy ships. Lu Yi was overjoyed. With 1 less enemy ship out of the 3, the Long Dragon battleship needs to dodge as much as 30% less attacks, and the situation will inevitably be greatly improved. As long as he continues to maintain this rhythm, it doesn't seem too difficult to destroy the remaining 2 enemy ships one by one. Just when Lu Yi was thinking this, he suddenly saw a group of black shadows flying out of the destroyed ship and quickly rushing towards the other 2 enemy ships. Lu Ye's face changed and he quickly ordered, "Kill them!" The faces of these black shadows could not be seen, and they did not even have a specific shape, but there was no doubt that they were the crew of the enemy ship. Their own battleship could not be saved, so they escaped in advance and went to the other 2 battleships. This was not good news for Lu Yi. Even though he gave the order quickly, and Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming perfectly carried out their orders, they still did not do everything they could. More than half of the enemy ship's crew was successfully received by their own battleship and hid inside. Immediately afterward, Lu Yi discovered that the remaining 2 battleships, whether it was the power of the defensive arrays or the frequency of the offensive arrays, had clearly improved. This was undoubtedly the effect of the crew that escaped. With more manpower available, the performance of the battleship would naturally be improved. Not only the enemy ship, but the Long Dragon battleship as well. If the number of crew members on their side had doubled, the situation would not be so anxious. Lu Ye's heart was filled with hatred. However, at this point, there was nothing he could do, so he could only continue to entangle with the remaining two enemy ships. The improved performance of the enemy ship became even more difficult to deal with, and with the passage of time, the performance of the crew on his side became worse and worse, each of them consuming a great deal of spiritual energy and mental strength. Less than half a day later, the Long Dragon battleship was blasted apart by the two enemy battleships. The crew of the battleship did not abandon the ship and flee like the enemy, because it was meaningless. If the enemy abandoned the ship, they would be supported by their allies, but if they did not receive any support, they would only become a target. On the 18th cycle, Lu Yi gave another order, and while the enemy ship had not yet appeared, he thought about all the gains and losses. Chapter 1306. There was no doubt that his strategy was correct. Instead of passively taking a beating, it was better to take the initiative to attack. Offense was the best defense. The battle just now had proved this point. However, there were always some accidents that would happen inadvertently. Lu Yi did not expect that after the enemy ship's protection was destroyed, the enemy crew would escape, which in turn increased the power of the remaining two ships. He had to find a way to solve this problem, otherwise, it would be difficult to achieve success in one fell swoop. Relying solely on Qin Zong and Xiao Jiaming to control the offensive array was useless. The offensive array controlled by Qin Zong was not used to deal with a single cultivator. Because the frequency of the offensive array was not high, he could only activate the offensive array twice in the short period of time when the enemy's crew was fleeing in all directions. Although the situation on Xiao Jiaming's side was better, it was still limited. Therefore, what he needed now was more intensive attacks. Lu Yi immediately used his divine sense to send a message to Haitang, instructing her in detail. Although from the current situation, the crew of the Long Dragon warship would strictly follow his orders, Lu Yi still did not dare to trust them too much, so he could only leave this key assistance to Haitang. He did not have many opportunities. If he could not achieve the expected results in the next 3 battles, he was afraid he would really follow in Haitang's footsteps and be inseparable from the Long Dragon warship forever. This was not the situation he wanted to see. After checking the situation of the Long Dragon warship again, Lu Ye's gaze pierced through the void and looked ahead, waiting for the enemy ships to arrive. A moment later, 3 warships came into view. Just like last time, the Long Dragon warship, under the control of Lu Yi, flew towards the enemy ships, and as the distance closed, the two sides attacked and shuttled back and forth. They still paid the price of reducing the strength of their own protection array by half, and the enemy ship locked onto by the Long Dragon warship was in imminent danger. At this moment, Lu Ye's divine sense surged and he shouted, "Senior Apprentice Sister Haitang." On the deck, Haitang, who was cooperating with the other crew members to activate the protection array, rushed out almost as soon as Lu Ye's voice sounded and rushed to the side of the deck. In that position, there was an attack array that had not yet been activated. In fact, there were several similar attack arrays on the Long Dragon warship, but they had not been activated because of the lack of manpower. Every spirit design had different characteristics and uses. The spirit design that Haitang was rushing towards this time was one that had a high attack frequency but was not very powerful. Of course, its power was only relatively speaking. The power of this formation was not very effective against battleships, but it was most suitable against cultivators. It could be said that this formation was specifically designed to deal with cultivators. As soon as Haitang got into position and activated the formation with her spirit power, the Long Dragon battleship swung its tail in front of the enemy's ship. At the same time, a powerful attack from Qin Zong's side struck the enemy ship. The protective light curtain was completely broken, and at this moment, a series of shapeless black shadows rushed out from the enemy ship. It was also at this moment that Haitang activated the power of the formation she controlled. Balls of light suddenly flew out from the formation and spread out. Many of the black shadows that escaped from the enemy ship were caught off guard and several of them hit the balls of light. In an instant, the balls of light bloomed with lightning and wrapped the black shadows. It could be vaguely seen that the black shadows were wriggling violently, as if they were struggling, but they were unable to break free from the confinement of the balls of lightning and slowly disappeared. More balls of light flew out like fireflies, and under Haitang's control, they strangled the enemy's crew. Lu Ye's mind had been paying attention to the movements here, and seeing that the effect was good, he was relieved. The long dragon battleship shook incessantly. While Haitang was controlling the formation, the remaining 2 enemy battleships were not idle and had been attacking this side. In order to better assist Haitang in killing the enemy's crew, Lu Yi did not dare to make large movements. As a result, the long dragon battleship suffered several fierce attacks from the enemy, and the price was that the strength of the protective light curtain was weakened by another 10%. Not daring to continue, the long dragon battleship moved again, trying to avoid the enemy's attacks. The 3 offensive formations on their side were still pouring out power. Qin Zong and Xiao Jianming had always been the main force against the enemy's ships. Seeing that the 3 surviving enemy's crew members had been rescued and there was no possibility of killing them, Haitang returned to her original position and joined the sequence of maintaining the protective formation. One of the enemy's ships had been destroyed, and even the crew on the enemy's ship had been almost wiped out. The long dragon battleship now only needed to face the entanglement of 2 enemy ships. Compared to just now, the situation was undoubtedly much better. The only disadvantage was that the strength of the protective formation had decreased too much, and it was only about 40% of its peak. It was undoubtedly difficult to rely on such a strength to fight against the remaining 2 battleships. Lu Yi was even more focused on controlling the battleship, and from time to time, he would make exquisite cooperation with Qin Zong and Xiao Jianming. A moment later, when the strength of the protective formation on their side was reduced to the last 10%, the defense of the second enemy ship was about to collapse. With the previous experience, Haitang did not wait for Lu Ye's orders this time and acted. She quickly arrived at the position and activated the power of the formation. The next moment, the formation of the second enemy ship was broken, and the same scene as before appeared in front of them. The crew of the enemy ship escaped again and ran toward the last remaining battleship. Haitang activated the power of the formation to intercept and kill, and Lu Yi did his best to cooperate with her. However, before Haitang could achieve much, the long dragon battleship shook with a loud bang, and its defense was broken. The last scene that appeared in Lu Ye's vision was a bright pillar of light erupting from the enemy ship. It was a failure. In the 19th reincarnation, Lu Yi stood in front of the control center ball, frowning. In the previous reincarnation, they had undoubtedly done their best. Regardless of whether it was him, Qin Sek's Xiao Jianming, 9, or Haitang, they had all performed quite well. They had fought 1 against 3 and destroyed 2 enemy warships. This kind of result could be said to be astonishing. However, they still failed at the final juncture. There was no problem with their cooperation, so the only problem was that there were too many enemies. How could they improve it? They could not divide their manpower to control more offensive formations. If that was the case, the strength of the defensive formation would be correspondingly weakened, and the gains would not make up for the losses. If Lu Yi was given enough opportunity to cooperate with his crew, Lu Yi believed that they would definitely win. But now, what he lacked was opportunity. Including this time, he only had 2 chances. It could be said that he already had 1 foot on the edge of the cliff. After thinking about it, Lu Yi could not think of any good ideas, but this did not prevent him from ordering his crew again to do their jobs. Haitang's voice sounded in his ear. "Junior brother, you did very well. This time I will do my best." This was not relief, but admiration. Because in those reincarnations when she was the captain, she had always been the passive party. Not to mention destroying 2 enemy battleships, she had not even destroyed a single one. This made her wonder if anyone had really passed the test on this ghost ship. But now she knew that someone had definitely passed such a test. She could not do it, but that was because she was not capable enough, but it did not mean that others would be the same. She had fallen into the ghost ship and could not get out. It would not be long before she really died. At that time, she would no longer appear on this ghost ship. She had suffered a loss, and she did not want others to follow in her footsteps, even if they were just strangers. That was why she reminded Lu Yi during his first reincarnation. Later, when Lu Yi came to find her, she did not hold back and shared her information. Senior sister did a good job. It's my problem, Lu Yi replied. The success or failure of a battle between battleships was the person controlling the battleship. After all, the crew still obeyed his orders. But how could he solve the problem of the defensive formation's power at the last moment? Lu Yi could not think of any ideas for a while, unless he could better control the battleship to avoid the enemy's attacks. Even if he had some talent in this regard, and was familiar with the control of the battleship after reincarnation, the time was still short. Right now, he had reached his limit and could not improve any more. Enemy attack! The familiar shout came again, and Lu Yi quickly calmed his mind and focused on controlling the battleship. Although he knew that if he did not solve the problem at the last moment, the situation would not improve no matter how many reincarnations he went through, he did not have much time to think at this time. The enemy's battleship was attacking, and he must devote himself to controlling the battleship. Even if he wanted to use his clone to control another attack formation, he could not. Most of the time, he could multitask even when fighting some strong enemies, but when controlling the battleship, he really could not do it. When controlling the battleship, his whole mind was immersed in the battleship, and he could not effectively control his clone at all. Not long after, a fierce battle broke out. The situation was the same as last time. When the strength of their defensive formation was left with half, an enemy battleship was blown up. Hai Tang quickly changed the formation and killed the crew of the enemy battleship. After dealing with this matter, she returned to the defensive formation. Another fierce battle ensued, and when the defensive strength of their battleship was only left with the last 10% and was on the verge of collapse, the enemy's second battleship was blown up. Hai Tang changed her position again. If this continued, the situation would be the same as last time, without any changes, and Lu Yi would inevitably enter the 20th reincarnation. At this critical moment, Lu Ye's heart suddenly moved, and he realized that he had misunderstood. Why did he have to kill the crew of the second enemy battleship? The crew of the first enemy battleship must be killed because once they were received and entered the remaining two enemy battleships, the performance of the enemy battleships would be greatly improved. But the crew of the second enemy battleship did not seem to be necessary to kill them all. Chapter 1307. In such a battlefield, the value of the crew's existence was the enhancement of the battleship's power. Now that there was only one enemy battleship left, if they could quickly get rid of this battleship, then it didn't matter whether the crew of the second battleship was killed or not. So what if they were allowed to live? Lu Yi suddenly had a feeling of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and his thoughts were suddenly enlightened. The main reason was that he had too little experience. Before this, he had never come into contact with this mode of combat, leading to his own misconceptions. Now that the shackles of his thinking had been broken, he suddenly saw the light of hope. Hurriedly sending a message to Hai Tang, asking her to go back and assist Su Qingwei in controlling the protective array, Lu Yi urged his own strength and madly poured it into the control center of the battleship. At this moment, the connection between himself and the battleship reached an unprecedented level of closeness. This also gave Lu Yi a glimmer of understanding. If he failed again this time, there would not be a 20th time, and this would be his last chance. Under Lu Ye's control, the Long Dragon battleship, which was already moving erratically, suddenly came to a halt and charged straight towards the last enemy ship. In the blink of an eye, the entire battleship had turned into a streak of light. Hai Tang, who had just returned to her position, saw this and immediately understood Lu Ye's plan. In a hurry, she also desperately urged her spirit power to help Su Qingwei maintain the protective array. The enemy battleship's attacks poured down, and Lu Yi tried his best to avoid them. If possible, he did not want to avoid them, but the dragon battleship's defenses were too fragile now. At most, it could only withstand one more attack from the enemy battleship, so he had no choice but to dodge. Under the close connection between himself and the battleship, controlling the battleship became easier than before. There were several times when the enemy's attacks brushed past the long dragon battleship, and the battleship was almost hit. This scene caused Haitang to break out in cold sweat. The last battleship saw the dragon battleship coming straight at it and obviously realized Lu Ye's intention, so it immediately turned around and tried to escape from the side. However, there was no chance. Lu Ye made this decision completely on the spur of the moment, and there was no warning at all. After making the decision, he went all out. There was very little time and space left for the enemy battleship to react. Senior Sister Haitang, protect yourself. At the last moment, Lu Ye hurriedly transmitted his voice to Haitang. The collision between warships was earth-shattering. Lu Ye did not care whether the other crew members would die as a result. They were not living people, but part of the ghost ship. However, Haitang had done him a favor, so he still had to remind her. Hearing Lu Ye's voice transmission, Haitang hurriedly took out a defensive spiritual treasure to protect herself. The next moment, the two huge warships collided with each other. The defense of the Long Dragon battleship was immediately broken. After all, it only had 10% of its power left. After this collision, there was no way it could maintain its defense. For a moment, the crew on the ship swayed left and right, unable to stand firm. Lu Ye's consciousness passed through the battleship and closely observed the movements of the enemy. Under the huge impact, the defensive formation of the enemy ship did not break immediately. Instead, it caved in from the point of impact, as if it was extremely resilient. Seeing this scene, Lu Ye no longer dared to hesitate and poured his spiritual power into the control center even more fiercely. Success or failure depended on this move. If he did not succeed this time, he could only rely on Haitang here. Moreover, Haitang would probably disappear in a few months. At that time, he would be alone. Just thinking about it made him shudder. But no matter how hard Lu Ye tried, he still could not break the defense of the enemy ship. On the contrary, the enemy ship's formation began to hum, and a bright light and powerful spiritual power began to fluctuate. Lu Ye's face darkened as he realized that things were not going well. At this moment, it was obviously too late to escape, but if this continued, it seemed that he would not be able to do his best. He was really in a dilemma. But at this moment, the entire Long Dragon battleship suddenly shook, and a bright beam of light burst out, bombarding the enemy ship's defense at close range. As if the last straw that broke the camel's back, under the impact of this bright beam of light, the sunken defense instantly collapsed. Lu Ye was overjoyed, and with a thought, he immediately understood whose work this was. It was Haitang. At this moment, she was standing in Qin Zong's original position, activating the formation that Qin Zong had controlled. This was an offensive formation that was specially designed to deal with battleships. When activated at such close range, its power could be imagined. As for Qin Zong, he had already been sent flying by the collision. It was not that he did not react quickly enough, but that the change was simply too sudden. Only Haitang, who had been warned by Lu Ye, managed to stabilize herself. The other crew members were all thrown out of their original positions. Seeing that the situation was not right, Haitang immediately took over Qin Zong's position, and only then was she able to react in time. When the light scattered, the deck of the third enemy ship was in a state of devastation. Many of the formations had collapsed, and the entire ship was in tatters. Success! Lu Ye almost laughed out loud. The world was truly unpredictable. He did not expect that Haitang would be able to make such a great contribution at the final moment. His heart was filled with gratitude. But soon, Lu Ye's smile froze on his face. This was because the aura of the Moon Jade Realm cultivators surged out from the tattered ship. Not only that, but there were also the auras of Constellation Realm cultivators. The surviving crew members of the second battleship also surrounded them from all directions. This test was not over yet. Lu Ye had thought that as long as he destroyed 3 enemy ships, he would pass the Spectre ship's test. But now, it seemed that he had been happy too early. Destroying the enemy ships was just the process. Killing all the enemies on the ships was the end. In his perception, there were many enemies, about 30 of them. Lu Ye did not care about the others, but the key was that the enemy had the Moon Jade Realm. How could he defeat them? But soon, Lu Yi thought of something. With his own strength, he was naturally not a match for the Moon Jade realm, but he still had a trump card. Was the secret technique that Feng Rumo had sealed in the Mountain Pan Saber for this moment? If that was the case, then Feng Rumo must have a deep understanding of the Spectre ship. That was why he had left such a method for him. Lu Yi didn't have time to think too much about it. The enemy's Moon Jade mirror had already locked onto him with its divine sense. A black shadow even larger than the one Lu Yi had seen before flew out of the enemy ship and headed straight for him. Lu Yi flashed outside and stared at the black shadow. He quickly pulled out the Mountain Pan Saber and poured his spirit chi into it. He had checked the seal before and knew that it was not difficult to undo it. All he needed to do was pour in enough spirit chi. As for how powerful it was, he would know after trying it out. A slight vibration came from the Mountain Pan Saber. The seal had been broken. In an instant, the Mountain Pan Saber released a heart-palpitating aura. Lu Ye's hand holding the saber began to tremble, and he could not hold the saber steadily. He quickly used both hands and his divine sense locked onto the Moon Jade realm's black shadow. He raised the saber high and slashed diagonally. When Lu Yi undid the seal, the black shadow realized that something was wrong. It was originally pouncing toward Lu Yi, but now it was retreating. When Lu Ye's saber slashed down, a golden light flew out from the saber and rapidly grew. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a strange beast that Lu Yi did not recognize. At first glance, it looked like a ferocious tiger, but it was different from the ferocious tiger that Lu Yi knew. This was because it had a horn on its forehead and was covered in fine scales. It looked very lifelike, like a living creature. The strange beast opened its mouth and let out a roar. Even in the starry sky, the roar accurately reached Lu Ye's ears. Lu Ye's mind was in a daze. Waves rose up in his divine sea. If not for the protection of the soul-suppressing pagoda, even his divine soul would have become unstable. He was only affected by the aftermath. The Moon Jade realm's black shadow was the first to bear the brunt of the impact. The black shadow, which was about to retreat, suddenly froze in place. The golden beast pounced over, opening its bloody maw and swallowing the black figure into its stomach. Not only that, but the few Constellation Realm black shadows following behind the Moon Jade Realm's black shadow were also unlucky. They all became food for the golden beast. After swallowing these enemies, the golden beast roared at the sky, then turned into specks of golden light and disappeared. Such majesty made people gasp in amazement. This was only one of the secret techniques that Feng Rumo had sealed in the Mountain Pan Saber. Lu Yi did not know what it would be like if he used it himself. Lu Yi did not have the time to sigh. He had already charged forward with his saber. At the same time, he transmitted his divine consciousness to his surroundings. Kill! He flashed into the group of enemies and began a massacre. The roar of the golden beast affected almost everyone present. However, at the level of the constellation tier, almost all of them had methods to protect their souls. The only difference was the strength of their methods. Hence, the time it took for them to recover was also different. The enemies that Lu Yi killed were those who had not fully recovered. It was easy to kill them. With the Mountain Pan Saber enhanced with the Divine Edge Spirit inscriptions, he killed one with each slash. He had only just started attacking when Qin Zong and Xiao Jianming rushed over to help. These two were at the late stage of the Constellation Realm, so they recovered faster than the others. After a while, both sides recovered, and a great battle broke out. In terms of numbers, the enemy undoubtedly had the advantage. However, the Golden Beast had swallowed a few enemies, and Lu Yi had killed a few when they were unprepared. The difference in numbers between the two sides was not that great. Lu Ye's side also had their own advantages. After Lu Yi gave the order, the crew of his side divided into two battle formations, led by Qin Zong and Xiao Jianming respectively. They were like two indestructible arrows, constantly shuttling back and forth in the enemy's formation. On the other hand, after the death of the Moon Jade Realm, the enemy was like a pile of loose sand. They could not deal with such a method at all. In such a situation, it was difficult to make use of the slight advantage in numbers. Once an enemy was targeted by their battle formations, they would not be able to survive. Chapter 1308. Lu Yi fought alone and didn't form a formation with the others. This was mainly because he was nimble enough. With the help of the Imperial artifact, he created void spirit veins, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Taking advantage of the enemy's entanglement, he wantonly reaped the lives of his enemies like a ghost. The Pan Mountain Saber was incomparably sharp, and no one in the constellation could block the power of his saber. This battle didn't last long. Less than an incense stick's worth of time after the golden beast disappeared, the last enemy was killed on the spot. Lu Yi held his saber, looked around, and let out a long sigh. On one side of the battlefield, in the battle formation led by Qin Zong, Haitang watched this scene with dazzled eyes. He did it, he actually did it. During the time she was trapped on Spectre ship, she had been reflecting on herself and deducing the various possibilities that she had hoped for. But no matter how she deduced, she could only come to a conclusion that made her despair. That was, with her strength, once trapped on Spectre ship, there was no hope of escaping. She had always felt that no one could pass the test of Spectre ship, because the biggest difficulty was the problem of spiritual power reserves. The cultivators who broke into this space were different from the crew of Spectre ship. Their spiritual power was constantly being consumed and wouldn't be reversed with reincarnation. Spectre ship also had a rule that no matter what cultivation level one entered, they could only display the strength of the early constellation stage. So even if a Sunshine Realm cultivator entered, their performance wouldn't be better than hers. Although every death was a new start, allowing one to accumulate more experience, if one didn't have enough spiritual power reserves, what was the point of accumulating more experience? Haitang didn't know how Lu Yi solved this problem. After nearly 20 reincarnations, he was still able to maintain an abundant flow of spiritual power and didn't even show the slightest sign of fatigue. But this was undoubtedly his ability. She was somewhat envious, but also somewhat relieved. In this way, Lu Yi wouldn't be trapped on the ship forever like her, until he became nutrients for Spectre ship. The battlefield was quiet. In the starry sky, if one didn't use their spiritual sense, no sound could be heard. Lu Yi turned to look at his crew. Logically speaking, after going through such a tough battle and finally achieving victory, there should be some sort of celebration. But the crew weren't living people, so at this moment, they all stood in place, wooden. When Lu Yi looked over, almost all the crew, except Haitang, turned to look in the direction of the Long Dragon warship, their movements orderly and stiff. Lu Ye's heart stirred. Spectre ship's test. Now that he had passed, it was time to collect his spoils of war. He had already sensed the aura of a treasure from inside the Long Dragon warship. This was something he hadn't felt before. Immediately put his saber away, the Long Lu Ye's crew, silently, the crew members of the ship. Following the aura of the treasure, Lu Yi soon came to a door on the lowest level of the ship. He was sure that there was no such door before, or even if there was, he would not have been able to see it under the mysterious rules of the Spectre ship. The gate of the Teat Yi Feel. Of a Ling Li Long's. Him. Of his, and tilted his of his and of he ti. Since the end of the test, Qin Zong and the others had been expressionless. At this moment, when they heard Lu Ye's order, a ferocious look flashed across their faces, as if they were about to devour someone. Lu Yi knew that these guys had been hoping that he couldn't pass the test, but in the end, they didn't get what they wanted, so they were very unwilling. But due to the various rules of the Spectre ship, even if they were unwilling, there was nothing they could do. Qin Zong and Xiao Jianming came from the left and right, each pushing on one side of the gate. With a heavy push, the gate slowly opened. There were no glittering jewels, only a cloud of mist that wriggled in front of Lu Ye's eyes. Then, a sinister and strange laughter entered Lu Ye's ears. What a powerful boy! Since you've passed the test of the Spectre ship, you can choose one item from this ship and take it with you. Polish your eyes carefully and examine carefully. After the voice fell, the fog disappeared, and the true appearance of the treasure house was imprinted in Lu Ye's vision. Lu Yi was not in a hurry to see the treasure house and instead used his divine sense to search for traces of the fog, but after a while, he did not find anything. He didn't know what the fog was, but listening to the other party's tone, It seemed to be the master of this treasure house. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi stepped forward. Looking around, he was slightly startled because the layout of this treasure house was similar to the layout of the War Merit Pavilion. There were many stone platforms, and each stone platform had a treasure placed on it. Yang Kai didn't know what the quality of these treasures was, but at a glance, there were at least 1,000 treasures here. Wow, there are so many things. A voice entered Lu Ye's ears, and when he turned around, Lu Yi laughed. Senior sister Hai Tang. Hai Tang blinked at him and said, I came with you to see the world. She could only come in, but she couldn't take anything here. Lu Yi looked outside the treasure house again and saw Qin Zong and the others standing there like wooden stakes, staring at him and Hai Tang with gloomy expressions, as if they were looking at masters who had broken into their home. They were extremely angry, but there was nothing they could do. It seemed that they couldn't enter the treasure house. Lu Yi couldn't be bothered to probe further. He transmitted his voice. Since senior sister Hai Tang is here, help me take a look. I won't hide it from you, but I've just entered the starry sky, and my knowledge is limited. I don't know which treasures are good and which ones are bad. Sure. Hai Tang agreed without hesitation. She first gave Lu Yi a suggestion. Junior brother, don't look at the treasures used to attack. These things are indeed very valuable, and even sunshine cultivators would be jealous of them. But for constellations like you and me, even if we take them, we can't unleash their full power, so they're not very useful. This suggestion was very pertinent and very practical. Every cultivator knew what kind of treasures they should use based on their cultivation level. It didn't mean that those with lower cultivation could do whatever they wanted with powerful treasures. If they couldn't unleash the power of the treasures, it would be like a 3-year-old wielding a sledgehammer. Even if they had the treasures, it would be useless. Lu Yi nodded. That's what I think too. With this premise, the number of targets they needed to consider was reduced by half. The two immediately split up and started searching. Lu Yi glanced at the treasures that were obviously used for attacking. He only checked the other treasures, but he soon discovered a problem. Every stone platform was shrouded in an inexplicable restriction, so he couldn't take out the treasures sealed in them to check. He could only rely on his own eyesight. How good could his eyesight be? He felt that everything he looked at was incomparably valuable, so he couldn't make a decision. At this moment, Hai Tang's voice sounded. Junior brother Lu, over here. Lu Yi went over in a flash. Hai Tang pointed at the stone table in front of her and said, How about this treasure robe? I noticed that junior brother doesn't have a treasure robe protecting you. There are many dangers in battle. Since this treasure robe is placed here, it must be of high quality. Even if junior brother's cultivation isn't high enough and you can't unleash its full power, the material itself is enough to allow junior brother to avoid many dangers in battle. Lu Yi nodded. This is not bad. I'll keep it as a backup. Hai Tang was very happy to receive his affirmation. She became even more excited and helped him examine the treasures. Lu Yi returned to his original position and looked around. From time to time, Hai Tang would call out to him. It was obvious that she had found a treasure that was suitable for him. Lu Yi also found a few good things. Although he couldn't identify their specific uses, he could still make some guesses. It was undeniable that there were many precious treasures in Spectre Ship. There were all kinds of treasures. Any cultivator who needed them, regardless of their cultivation, could find what they wanted here. Not to mention those sunshine cultivators. For a constellation cultivator like Lu Yi, if he could bring out a treasure of good quality, even if he couldn't use it himself, he could exchange it for cultivation resources he wanted. This could save him hundreds of years of hard work. Of course, the risk was also high. If Lu Yi didn't have the means to quickly replenish his spiritual power would have been exhausted after each cycle. Therefore, in the starry sky, even if Spectre Ship was famous and many people who saw it knew that it contained opportunities, almost no one dared to trespass here. For some reason, Feng Rumo had instructed Lu Yi to come here to search for opportunities. When he was instructing Lu Yi, he probably didn't care about Lu Yi's life or death. For a powerhouse like him, The life or death of an unfamiliar junior in the early stage of a constellation cultivator was indeed not worth his attention. But no matter what, Lu Yi still relied on the methods sealed in the mountain pansaber to win the final victory. He couldn't blame others, and there was no need to be grateful. It was very troublesome to check the thousands of treasures. After more than 4 hours, Lu Yi and Haitang worked together to choose 9 treasures. As for which one to choose, Lu Yi wanted it all. This was a bit difficult. At this time, Haitang wouldn't give him any more advice. Lu Yi could only make the decision himself. Although he was hesitant, he still had to make a choice. Lu Yi finally stood in front of a stone platform. It wasn't the treasure robe he saw before, but an inconspicuous bead. But Lu Yi could feel that the value of this bead was extraordinary. It was definitely much more valuable than most of the treasures in the treasury. Because even with the isolation of the restriction, there was still a faint aura leaking out. Seeing that he had made his decision, Haitang smiled and walked out. Lu Yi raised his hand to grab the stone platform. However, just as his hand was about to touch the restriction, he suddenly thought of something and looked at Haitang's back. After thinking for a while, Lu Yi looked up and said with his spiritual sense, "Come out." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.